Deep in the shadows of Blackwood Hall, Miss Jane Marple unravels a deadly riddle. The heart of Blackwood lies hidden, where shadows guard the past. A cryptic journal, a hidden passage, and a stolen ring lead her through a web of betrayal, as Clara, Edward, and James confront their family's dark secrets, with a mysterious stranger digging in the orchard and a scheming lawyer wielding a pistol. Miss Marple's sharp mind races against time to expose a decades-old love, a lost inheritance, and a truth that could tear the Blackwoods apart or heal them forever. Chapter 1. A tranquil morning in St. Mary Mead. The sun rose slowly over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in soft gold. Cottages with thatched roofs and bright gardens dotted the lanes, their roses and daisies nodding in the breeze. Sparrows chirped, and the faint clink of milk bottles echoed from the cart trundling down the road. Inside her cozy cottage, Miss Jane Marple sat by the window, her knitting needles clicking like a quiet heartbeat. She was a small woman, her white hair neatly pinned, her blue eyes sharp as ever. At 70-something, she seemed like any sweet old lady, but her mind was a trap for secrets. Her home was warm and tidy, with lace curtains fluttering and a fireplace that stayed cold in summer. Today, the windows were open, letting in air that smelled of grass and fresh bread. Miss Marple wasn't knitting with much focus. She was watching, always watching. The village woke up slowly, and she noted every detail. Mrs. Pauck swept her front step, her broom swishing steadily. Tommy, the baker's boy, dashed by with a tray of rolls, nearly tripping. Mr. Hodges knelt in his garden, grumbling about slugs eating his dahlias. It was all so normal, so calm. But Miss Marple knew calm could hide trouble. She sipped her tea, the cup warm against her palms. Her thoughts drifted to old-times village gossip, small scandals, and mysteries she'd solved from this very chair. St. Mary Mead seemed sleepy to outsiders, but to her, it was alive with stories. People's hearts held greed, love, or anger, and those feelings always slipped out, whether in a glance or a whisper. The mantel clock ticked toward 9. She set her tea down and picked up her knitting, her fingers moving smoothly. The village was busier now. Mr. Clement, the postman, pedaled past, his bicycle wobbling under a heavy bag. Miss Marple's eyes followed him. He paused at Mrs. Price's gate, likely for a biscuit, but then he stopped at hers. She leaned forward slightly. He pulled out a single envelope, not a bill or a flyer, but thick, cream-colored, with a red wax seal. Her lips pursed. Wax seals were old-fashioned, hinting at wealth or pretense. Mr. Clement slipped the letter through her mailbox and rode off, whistling. Miss Marple set her knitting aside and stood, her knees stiff but steady. She crossed the room, her slippers hushed on the wood floor, and picked up the envelope. It felt heavy, the paper smooth and costly. Her name was inked boldly, Miss Jane Marple. No address, no sender's name, just hers, like the writer knew exactly where she lived. She returned to her chair, the letter in her lap. For a moment, she just studied it. A prank, a summons, something darker. She'd learned to be patient, rushing muddled things. She slid a letter opener under the seal, breaking it with a soft snap. Inside was one sheet, folded precisely. She opened it and read, "Dear Miss Marple, your presence is requested at Blackwood Hall this Friday evening for a gathering of particular importance. Your insight would be most valued. A call will arrive at 6 p.m. to bring you. Please come alone. Yours sincerely, E. Blackwood." Miss Marple's eyebrows rose. Blackwood Hall. The name stirred memories. The old estate loomed beyond the village, its gates rusty, its walls choked with ivy. It had stood empty since old Mr. Blackwood died years ago. Whispers of debts, family fights, and even ghosts clung to the place. Miss Marple didn't believe in ghosts. People caused trouble, not spirits. She read the letter again, her mind sifting details. The handwriting was too perfect, hiding the writer's character. E. Blackwood, relative, a stranger using the name. The Blackwoods had vanished after the old man's death, leaving only rumors. And why invite her? To most, she was just an old spinster. But someone knew her knack for seeing through lies. She tucked the letter into her pocket. The clock chimed 9. Outside, the village hummed. Mrs. Polk was chatting with Mrs. Price over the fence, their voices low but lively. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Gossip was a thread she could pull later. If Blackwood Hall was waking up, the village would know something. She moved to the kitchen, where Florence, her maid, was polishing silver. Florence was sturdy, with a plain face but a love for news. "Morning, Florence," Miss Marple said cheerfully. "Hear anything fun at the market?" Florence paused, spoon in hand. "Oh, Miss Marple, you won't believe it. Word is Blackwood Hall's been sold. City folks, maybe. Mrs. Price heard it from the grocer, who got it from a coal man. Saw lights there last night, too." Miss Marple nodded, hiding her interest. Lights. How odd. She didn't mention the letter. Florence would spread any hint, and Miss Marple wanted control of this puzzle. The morning flowed on. She weeded her garden, her hands steady in the dirt. She stopped to chat with Mr. Hodges, listening to his complaints about rain. At the post office, Mrs. Clement sorted mail. "Anything new, Mrs. Clement?" Miss Marple asked lightly. Mrs. Clement glanced up. "Not much, but Tom said he dropped a fancy letter at your place. Looked special." Miss Marple smiled. "Just a note from a friend." She lied and left. The village was already murmuring about Blackwood Hall. She walked home slowly, her eyes catching every detail. Mrs. Price's quick glance, Tommy's nervous grin. People revealed themselves in tiny ways. Back in her cottage, she sat by the window, the letter in hand. Friday was 2 days off. 2 days to listen and watch. Blackwood Hall was a mystery, and mysteries had answers. She just needed the right pieces. Thought her knitting needles clicked again, steady as a pulse. The sun climbed, warming the room. She thought of the letter, the hall, the village. Something was brewing, something dangerous. And Miss Marple would be ready. The day unfolded quietly, but Miss Marple's mind never rested. She trimmed her roses, her eyes flicking to the lane. Mrs. Polk waved, and Miss Marple waved back, noting the woman's quick step. Was she eager to share news? At noon, Florence served lunch, cold ham and saladan, chattered about the butcher's new apprentice. Miss Marple listened, asking small questions to keep the talk flowing. Florence mentioned Blackwood Hall again, saying the coal man swore he saw a car there last week. That Miss Marple nodded, her face calm. A car meant visitors, maybe the sender of her letter. She finished her meal and returned to her chair, the letter now on the table. She didn't need to read it again. The words were etched in her mind. She thought of old Mr. Blackwood, a gruff man with a sharp temper. He'd had a son, Edward, and a daughter, Clara, but both left St. Mary Mead long ago. Was E. Blackwood Edward, or someone else claiming the name? She picked up her knitting, her fingers swift. The village was a web, and every tug sent ripples. She'd visit the tea shop tomorrow, where Mrs. Price and her friends gossiped over scones. They'd know more about Blackwood, Hallites, cars, strangers. Miss Marple didn't chase clues. She let them come to her. The afternoon brought a visitor. Reverend Thomas, the vicar, stopped by with a book she'd lent him. He was a kind man, his face lined with worry for his flock. "Jane," he said, settling into a chair, "have you heard about Blackwood Hall? The village is buzzing." She poured tea, her movements slow. "Bits and pieces," she said. "Lights, a car, maybe new owners. What do you think?" He sighed. "I hope it's nothing troubling. That place has a dark history. Old Mr. Blackwood wasn't a happy man, and his family, well, there were quarrels." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gentle but keen. "Families often quarrel," she said. "Money, usually. Or love." The vicar chuckled. "You see too much, Jane. But you're right. I just pray this new stir doesn't bring harm." He left soon after, and Miss Marple sat alone, thinking. The vicar's words confirmed the village's unease. Blackwood Hall wasn't just a house. It was a shadow, and shadows hid things. Evening fell, the sky turning pink. Miss Marple lit a lamp and opened her book, but her mind was on Friday. She pictured Blackwood Hall, its cold stone walls, its dark windows, Who was waiting there? And why her? She'd solved mysteries before, but this felt different, bigger. Her knitting slowed, then stopped. She stared out the window, where stars were peeking through. The village slept, but Miss Marple didn't. Her mind turned, sorting, planning. She'd go to Blackwood Hall. She'd watch, listen, and wait. Answers always came, if you knew where to look. The next morning was crisp, the air sharp with dew. Miss Marple woke early, her body stiff but her mind clear. She dressed in her usual tweed skirt and cardigan, her brooch pinned neatly. Breakfast was toast and tea, eaten by the window. The village stirred Tommy with his rolls, Mrs. Polk with her broom. Miss Marple noted it all, her eyes missing nothing. She planned her day carefully. The tea shop at 11, then a walk past the church. The vicar's wife might know more, and Mrs. Price's friends would talk freely over tea. Miss Marple didn't push, she nudged gently, and people spilled their thoughts. At 10, she left the cottage, her handbag on her arm. The lane was quiet, but she felt eyes on her. Mrs. Clement, sweeping her step, waved. Off to the tea shop. Miss Marple. Yes, she called back. A scone sounds lovely. Mrs. Clement nodded, but her eyes lingered. Did she know about the letter? Miss Marple smiled and walked on, her steps slow but sure. The village was watching her now, just as she watched it. The tea shop was warm, smelling of sugar and butter. Mrs. Price sat with two friends, their heads close. Miss Marple chose a table nearby, ordering tea and a scone. She listened as she stirred her cup, catching words like Blackwood and stranger. Mrs. Price's voice was loudest. A man in a dark coat, the grocer said. At the hall's gate, bold as brass. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her face blank. A man in a dark coat, another piece of the puzzle. She stayed an hour, chatting lightly with the women when they greeted her. They shared nothing new, but their nervous laughs told her enough. The village was afraid. She left at noon, walking toward the church. The vicar's wife, Mrs. Thomas, was in the graveyard, tending flowers. Miss Marple, she said, brushing dirt from her hands. What brings you here? Just a stroll. Miss Marple, lead, though I hear Blackwood Hall's causing a stir. Mrs. Thomas frowned. It is. My husband's worried. That place, it's cursed. Some say. Miss Marple tilted her head. Cursed, or just forgotten? Mrs. Thomas hesitated. Maybe both, but lights at night. That's not right. Miss Marple nodded, filing the words away. She returned home, her mind full. Lights, a car, a man in a dark coat, and her letter, with its wax seal and cryptic words. She sat by the window, knitting again, her needles a steady rhythm. The day passed, and evening came. Miss Marple ate supper soup and bread, then read by lamplight, but her thoughts were on Blackwood Hall. Tomorrow was Thursday. One day left. Before the car arrived, she'd visit the grocer in the morning. He'd seen the man in a dark coat. A casual chat might reveal more. She went to bed early, her room cool and quiet. The village slept, but Miss Marple lay awake, her mind turning. Blackwood Hall was calling, and she'd answered. Not for adventure, but for truth. Truth always mattered. Thursday dawned gray, clouds heavy with rain. Miss Marple woke at 6, her body aching but her mind sharp. She ate breakfast, then dressed warmly. The grocer's shop opened at 8, and she'd be there early. The village was hushed, the air damp. She walked to the shop, her umbrella ready. The grocer, Mr. Finch, was stacking apples. Morning, Miss Marple, he said. Wet day, eh? It is, she agreed, though I hear stranger things than rain are about. Blackwood Hall, 4-1. Mr. Finch paused, his hand on an apple. I saw a man there myself. Tall, dark coat, hat pulled low. Stood by the gate, just looking. Miss Marple nodded. Odd, for an empty house. Mr. Finch leaned closer. Not empty now, I reckon. Lights on. And that car last week. Big one, black as night. She thanked him and bought a loaf, her mind racing. A tall man, a black car. The pieces were growing, but the picture wasn't clear. She walked home, rain pattering on her umbrella. The village felt different to Dayton's, like it was holding its breath. Back in her cottage, she sat with the letter again. Blackwood. The name nagged at her. She remembered Edward Blackwood, a quiet boy with his father's temper. Had he returned? Or was this someone new, using the family name? The day dragged on. She knitted, read, and listened to Florence's chatter. The maid mentioned Blackwood Hall again, saying the butcher saw smoke from its chimneys. Miss Marple nodded, her face calm. Smoke meant fires, and fires meant people. The hall was alive. Evening came, and Miss Marple prepared for bed. Tomorrow was Friday. The car would come at 6. She chose her outfit: a gray dress, sensible shoes, her best brooch. She'd look like a harmless old lady, but her mind would be ready. She slept lightly, dreaming of dark gates and wax seals. Morning would bring answers, or at least more questions. Either way, Miss Marple was ready. Chapter 2. The mysterious letter. Friday morning broke over St. Mary Mead with a pale, misty light. The village lay quiet, its cottages half hidden in fog that clung to the lanes like a soft blanket. Sparrows chattered in the hedges, and the faint clop of the milkman's horse echoed down the road. Miss Jane Marple woke early, her eyes opening to the dim glow of her bedroom. She lay still for a moment, her mind already turning. Today was the day. The car would come at 6, and Blackwood Hall waited. She felt no fear, only a steady curiosity, sharp as a pin. She rose, her joints stiff but her movements sure. The air was cool, and she pulled her shawl tight as she crossed to the window. The mist outside softened the world, making the village seem dreamlike. But Miss Marple knew dreams could hide danger. She dressed carefully: a gray dress, sensible shoes, her best brooch pinned to her chest. She looked like any old lady, harmless and frail. But her blue eyes held a glint that missed nothing. Downstairs, the cottage was silent. Florence wouldn't arrive for an hour, so Miss Marple made her own tea, the kettle whistling softly. She sat by the kitchen table, the letter from Blackwood Hall in her hand. She'd read it a dozen times, but now she studied it again, her fingers tracing the crisp paper. The red wax seal, now broken, had a faint crest: a lion, maybe, or a griffin. The handwriting was too neat, like it was hiding something. Blackwood. The name tugged at her memory, but it was like chasing smoke. She sipped her tea, the cup warm, and let her thoughts settle. The village had been buzzing all week. Lights at Blackwood Hall, a black car, a man in a dark coat. Yesterday, the grocer, Mr. Finch, had added more smoke from the chimneys. A stranger at the gate. Miss Marple didn't chase gossip, but she listened. Every word was a thread, and she was weaving them together. The letter was the center of it all, pulling her toward the hall like a hook. Why her? She was no one special, or so most thought, but someone knew her secret, her knack for seeing through people, for finding truth in lies. She set the letter down and moved to the parlor. Her slippers hushed on the floor. The clock ticked toward 7. She picked up her knitting, but her hands stayed still, her eyes on the window. The mist was thinning, revealing the lane outside. Mrs. Polk was already sweeping her step, her broom a steady swish. Tommy, the baker's boy, darted past, his tray wobbling. Miss Marple smiled faintly. The village was waking, and she'd watch it all, as always. Her mind drifted to Blackwood Hall. She'd never been inside, but she knew its story. The estate sat beyond the village, its iron gates locked for years. Old Mr. Blackwood had been a hard man, rich but bitter. His wife died young, leaving him with 2 children, Edward and Clara. Edward was quiet, with his father's temper. Clara was bright, but wild, always running off. After the old man's death, the family scattered, and the hall fell silent. Debts, quarrels, secrets, rumors filled the gaps. Now, it was stirring again, and Miss Marple was part of it. She thought of the letter's words: "Your insight would be most valued." Insight, a polite way of saying she saw too much. She'd solved mysteries before: stolen jewels, a poisoned cake, a liar unmasked hall, without leaving St. Mary Mead. People talked, And she listened. A glance, a pause, a story that didn't fit. They gave themselves away. This mystery felt bigger, though. The wax seal, the formal tone, the name Blackwood. It wasn't a village squabble. It was something deeper. The clock chimed 7. Miss Marple stood, her knees creaking. She moved to the kitchen, where Florence was now bustling in, her apron tied tight. "Morning, Miss Marple," Florence said, her voice cheerful but quick. "Tea's on, I see. Big day." Miss Marple smiled. "Just a quiet one, Florence. Any news from the village?" Florence set a pan on the stove, her hands busy. "Oh, plenty. Mrs. Price says the butcher saw a woman at Blackwood Hall, young, with a fancy hat, stood by the gate, looking nervous. And the coalman swears he heard voices there, late at night." Miss Marple nodded, her face calm. A woman now, not just a man in a dark coat. Voices. The puzzle grew. "How curious," she said, keeping her voice light. "Blackwood Hall's quite the talk." Florence snorted. "Always was. That place gives me the shivers. No good comes from it." Miss Marple didn't reply, but her mind was working. She ate breakfast toast and jam while Florence chattered about the market. The maid's words washed over her, but Miss Marple caught the important bits. The village was uneasy, and Blackwood Hall was the cause. She finished her meal and returned to the parlor, the letter now in her pocket. It felt heavier today, like it carried more than words. The morning passed slowly. She tended her garden, pulling weeds with steady hands. Mr. Hodges was in his yard, fussing with his dahlias. "Morning, Miss Marple," he called. "Hear about Blackwood Hall. Lights again last night." She paused, her trowel in hand. "Lights. My, it's busy there." He nodded, his face grimmed. "Too busy, if you ask me. That place should stay empty." Miss Marple smiled and went back to her weeds, but her thoughts raced. Lights every night now. Someone was there, and they weren't hiding. She finished in the garden and walked to the post office, her handbag swinging. Mrs. Clement was behind the counter, sorting letters. "Morning, Miss Marple," she said. "Off somewhere special today?" "Just a stroll," Miss Marple lied. "Though the village seems lively. All this talk of Blackwood Hall." Mrs. Clement leaned forward, her voice low. "It's queer, isn't it? My Tom saw a car there yesterday. Big one, with dark windows. Gave him the creeps." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gentle. "Cars, lights, strangers. Quite a mystery." Mrs. Clement laughed. "You'd solve it, Miss Marple. You always do." Miss Marple smiled and left, her mind turning. A car with dark windows. The grocer had mentioned a black car, too. Was it the same one? She walked home slowly, her eyes scanning the lane. Mrs. Price was at her gate, talking to Mrs. Pauck. They stopped when they saw her, their faces tight. Miss Marple waved, her smile warm, but she noted their silence. The village was watching her now, wondering why she was so curious. Back in her cottage, she sat by the window, the letter in her lap. The clock ticked toward noon. 6 hours until the car came. She thought of Blackwood Hall, its cold stone, its dark windows. Who was E. Blackwood? Edward, back after years away. Clara, hiding behind her father's name, or someone new, using the past to stir trouble. And why alone? "Please come alone." The words felt like a warning. She picked up her knitting, her needles clicking softly. The mist had lifted, and the village sparkled under a weak sun. Tommy ran by again, his tray empty. Mrs. Pauck was gone, her broom leaning against her door. Miss Marple's eyes followed every movement, her mind sorting details. The village was a puzzle, and Blackwood Hall was its heart. Lunch was simple soup, and bread served by Florence, who talked non-stop. Miss Marple listened, catching more hints. The butcher's wife thought the woman at the hall was a city type, with gloves and a scarf. Miss Marple nodded, her face blank. Gloves in summer. A disguise, maybe. She finished eating and returned to her chair. The letter, now on the table. She didn't need to read it. She knew it by heart. The afternoon dragged. She read a book, her eyes skimming the pages, but her mind elsewhere. She thought of old Mr. Blackwood, his angry voice carrying across the village years ago. Edward had left for London, or so the gossip said. Clara had run off with a man, or maybe to escape one. The hall had gone dark, but now it was alive again. Lights, voices, cars, and her letter, pulling her in. At 4, she stood and checked her bag, handkerchief, spectacles, a small notebook. She didn't expect trouble, but she was ready. She moved to the bedroom, brushing her dress smooth. The mirror showed an old lady, frail and quiet, but her eyes were steady. She pinned her brooch tighter and returned to the parlor. The clock now at 5. Florence left early, her work done. "You sure you're all right, Miss Marple?" she asked, her eyes worried. "You seem quiet." Miss Marple smiled. "Just thinking. Florence, have a good evening." The maid nodded and left, the door clicking shut. Miss Marple sat alone, the cottage silent. The clock ticked louder now, each second heavy. She thought of the car coming, its dark windows hiding who knew what. She wasn't afraid. She'd faced liars and thieves before, but this felt different, bigger, like a storm brewing. At 5:30, she stood and put on her coat. It was warm, but the evening might cool. She checked her bag again, then sat by the window, her hands folded. The lane was empty, the village settling into dusk. Lights flickered in cottages, but Miss Marple's eyes were on the road. She waited, calm but alert. At 6 sharp, a car appeared. It was black, its windows dark, just as Mrs. Clement had said. It stopped at her gate, its engine purring softly. Miss Marple rose, her heart steady. She locked her door, her key safe in her bag, and walked to the gate. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out tall, in a dark coat, his hat low. He opened the back door without a word, his face shadowed. Miss Marple nodded and climbed in, her movements slow but sure. The car smelled of leather and polish, its seats soft. The driver shut the door and returned to his seat, the car gliding forward. She looked out, but the windows were tinted, the village a blur. She settled back, her hands in her lap. Blackwood Hall was waiting, and so was the truth. The car turned onto the main road, its engine a low hum. Miss Marple thought of the letter, the seal, the name. Blackwood. She'd know soon enough. For now, she watched, listened, and waited. The mystery was unfolding, and she was ready. The drive was smooth, the car moving through the village and beyond. Miss Marple couldn't see much, but she felt the turns, counting them in her mind. Left at the church, right past the mill. The hall was a mile out, its gates hidden by trees. She pictured it tall, cold, with ivy choking the walls. The rumors swirled in her head. Debts, fights, ghosts. She pushed the ghosts aside. People were the problem, always. The car slowed, gravel crunching under the tires. A gate creaked, and they moved forward, the road bumpy now. Miss Marple's hands stayed still, but her eyes flicked to the driver. He hadn't spoken, his shoulders stiff. Was he just a driver, or something more? She'd find out. The car stopped, and the driver opened her door. She stepped out, her shoes sinking into soft earth. Blackwood Hall loomed before her, its windows dark but for a faint glow upstairs. The air was heavy, smelling of damp stone and old leaves. The driver gestured to the door, still silent. Miss Marple nodded and walked forward, her bag on her arm. The door was tall, its wood carved with vines. It opened before she knocked, revealing a hall lit by candles. A woman stood there young, in a green dress, her face pale. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice tight. "Welcome. I'm glad you came." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes sharp. "Thank you, my dear. And you are?" The woman hesitated. Clara Blackwood." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. Clara, the wild girl, back after years. Or was she? The mystery deepened, but Miss Marple was ready. She stepped inside, the door closing behind her. Blackwood Hall swallowed her, and the game began. Chapter 3. Arrival at Blackwood Hall. The heavy door of Blackwood Hall closed behind Miss Jane Marple, with a soft thud, shutting out the damp evening air. The hall was dim, lit by flickering candles and iron sconces on the walls. Shadows danced across the high ceiling, where cobwebs clung like lace. The air smelled of old wood and wax, with a faint hint of something sharper, maybe dust or secrets. Miss Marple stood still, her handbag on her arm, her eyes taking in every detail. Clara Blackwood, the young woman who'd greeted her, shifted, nervously, her green dress catching the light. "This way, Miss Marple," she said, her voice thin. "They're waiting." Miss Marple nodded, her face calm but her mind racing. Clara Blackwood. The name stirred old memories, village gossip about a wild girl who'd left St. Mary Mead years ago, chasing love or trouble. This Clara was pale, her dark hair pinned tightly, her hands twisting together. Was she really the same girl, or was the name a mask? Miss Marple followed her, her sensible shoes quiet on the worn stone floor. The hall stretched ahead, its walls lined with faded portraits. Stern faces stared down, their eyes seeming to follow her. Blackwoods, she thought, a family with secrets. Clara led her through a doorway into a larger room, a drawing room, grand but tired. The furniture was heavy, draped in dust sheets, and the fireplace stood cold. A chandelier hung above, its crystals dull with grime. 3 people waited there, their faces lit by more candles on a long table. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but she kept her smile gentle, like she was visiting neighbors for tea. She studied them as Clara introduced her. "Miss Marple," Clara said, her voice catching. "This is my brother, Edward Blackwood." She gestured to a man standing by the table. He was tall, with dark hair and a sharp jaw, his suit crisp but his eyes wary. He nodded, his lips tight. Miss Marple noted the way he stood stiff, like he was guarding something. Edward, the quiet boy from years ago. Now, a man with shadows in his gaze. "And this is Mr. Lionel Drake," Clara continued, pointing to an older man seated in a high-backed chair. He was stout, with a red face and a gray mustache that twitched when he smiled. His suit was too tight, and a gold watch chain gleamed at his waist. "A family advisor," Clara added, hesitating. Drake rose, his smile wide but not reaching, his eyes. Miss Marple shook his hand, her grip firm. His palm was damp, and she sensed greed in him, like a whiff of sour wine. Lastly, Clara said, "Miss Evelyn Shaw." A woman stood by the window, her back to the room until now. She turned, and Miss Marple saw a face both beautiful and cold. Evelyn was young, maybe 30, with blonde hair in soft waves and a silk dress that shimmered. Her green eyes flicked over Miss Marple, dismissing her as unimportant. "Evelyn is a friend of the family," Clara said, her voice faltering. Evelyn smiled, but it was sharp, like a blade. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gentle but missing nothing. Evelyn was no friend. She was here for something else. "Please, sit," Edward said, his voice low. He pulled out a chair for Miss Marple, and she settled into it, her handbag in her lap. The others sat, their movements stiff, like actors unsure of their lines. Clara hovered near Edward, her hands still twisting. Drake leaned forward, his fingers tapping the table. Evelyn stayed by the window, her gaze drifting outside. Miss Marple folded her hands, waiting. She'd learned long ago that silence drew out truths. Edward cleared his throat. "Miss Marple, we're grateful you came. You have a reputation in St. Mary Mead for seeing things others miss." Miss Marple tilted her head, her smile mild. "Oh, I just listen, Mr. Blackwood. People talk, and I pay attention." Drake chuckled, but it sounded forced, modest. Well, we need that sharp mind of yours. There's a matter here delicate, you understand." Miss Marple's eyes flicked to him. "Delicate matters are often the most interesting," she said. "What's troubling you?" Edward glanced at Clara, then at Drake. Evelyn sighed, loud enough to draw eyes, but said nothing. Edward leaned forward, his voice dropping. "It's about our father's will. There's a question about it. We need someone outside the family, someone trusted, to help us sort it out." Miss Marple nodded, her face calm. "A will. Money, then, or power." She'd seen families tear themselves apart over less. "And why me?" she asked, her voice soft. I'm just an old lady. Clara spoke, her words rushing out. Because you're fair, Miss Marple. Everyone says so. You solved that trouble with the vicar's silver and the poison pen letters. You see things. Miss Marple smiled, but her mind was turning. They knew her reputation, but how? She hadn't seen Clara or Edward in years. Someone had been talking, or watching. She glanced at Evelyn, who was studying her nails. Then at Drake, whose smile was too wide. Edward's eyes were steady, but there was fear in them. Fear of what? Tell me more, Miss Marple said, her voice gentle. A will can cause all sorts of fuss. What's the trouble here? Drake jumped in, his voice loud. It's complicated. Miss Marple, old Mr. Blackwood, left a fortune, but the will's got conditions. Odd ones. We need to make sure it's fair. Evelyn snorted, her voice cutting. Fair. It's a mess, Lionel. Let's not pretend. She looked at Miss Marple, her eyes narrowing. The old man was mad, and his will's a trap. That's the truth. Clara flinched, and Edward's jaw tightened. Miss Marple noted it, all their reactions, their words, their silences. A trap. Interesting. She leaned back, her hands still. A trap needs bait, she said. What's the bait here? The room went quiet. The candles flickered, casting shadows that seemed to move. Edward looked at Clara, then at Drake. Evelyn smirked, but it didn't reach her eyes. Finally, Edward spoke, his voice low. The estate, Miss Marple, Blackwood Hall, and everything in it. But there's a catch. The will says only one of us can inherit, and there's a test. Miss Marple's eyebrows rose, but her face stayed calm. A test. She'd heard of strange wills before. Whittles, tasks, games. But this felt darker. What kind of test? She asked. Drake waved a hand, his voice too cheerful. Nothing to worry about, Miss Marple. Just a family matter. We need your help to make sure it's done right. Miss Marple smiled, but her eyes were sharp. He was hiding something. They all were. She glanced at Clara, whose hands were trembling now. At Edward, whose face was a mask. At Evelyn, who looked bored but watched everything. The room felt heavy, like a storm was coming. I'll do what I can, Miss Marple said, her voice soft, but I'll need to know more. Wills are tricky, and tests, well, they can bring out the worst in people. Evelyn laughed, a cold sound. You've no idea, old lady. Clara gasped, but Miss Marple only smiled. She'd been called worse, and Evelyn's words told her something: anger, maybe fear. She filed it away, like a thread in her knitting. Edward stood, his voice firm. We'll talk more tomorrow, Miss Marple. It's late, and you've traveled. Clara will show you to your room. Miss Marple nodded and rose, her movements slow, but steady. Clara hurried to her side, her face pale. This way, she said, leading Miss Marple back to the hall and up a wide staircase. The wood creaked under their feet, and the air grew colder. Portraits lined the walls, their eyes watching. Miss Marple felt the weight of the house, its secrets pressing down. They reached a bedroom, its door heavy and carved. Inside was a four-poster bed, a wardrobe, and a small fireplace with a weak flame. The room was clean but cold, the air stale. Clara lit a lamp, her hands shaking. I hope it's comfortable, she said. If you need anything. Miss Marple touched her arm, her voice kind. I'll be fine, my dear, but you look worried. Is there something you want to say? Clara's eyes widened, then dropped. No, it's nothing. Good night, Miss Marple. She hurried out, the door clicking shut. Miss Marple stood alone, her eyes scanning the room. The bed was made, the window locked. She checked her bag handkerchief, spectacles, notebook all there. She moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside. The night was black, the hall's grounds swallowed by darkness. But she saw a faint light moving outside, near the trees. A lantern, maybe, or someone watching. She let the curtain fall and sat on the bed, her mind turning. Edward, Clara, Drake, Evelyn, a will, a test, a fortune, and her, pulled into the heart of it. Why? She thought of the letter, the wax seal, the name, E. Blackwood, Edward. or someone else. The house was full of lies, and she'd need to tread carefully. She undressed and slipped into bed, the sheets cold against her skin. The fire crackled, but it gave little warmth. She lay awake, listening. The house creaked, like it was alive. Footsteps passed her door, soft and quick. A voice murmured, too low to hear. Miss Marple's eyes stayed open, her mind sharp. Blackwood Hall was a puzzle, and she was only beginning to see its shape. Morning would bring more clues. She'd watch, listen, wait. Truth always came, if you were patient. For now, she closed her eyes, her breathing slow. The house whispered, but Miss Marple was ready. The night was long, broken by sounds of creak, a thump, a distant door. Miss Marple slept lightly, her mind half awake. She dreamed of St. Mary Mead, its sunny lanes and gossiping neighbors. But the dream twisted, the village swallowed by Blackwood Hall's shadow. She woke at dawn, the room gray and cold. The fire was dead, and the air smelled of dust. She rose, her body stiff, but her mind clear. She dressed quickly, pinning her brooch with steady hands. The house was silent now, but she felt its weight. She checked her bag again, then moved to the window. The grounds were misty, the trees dark shapes. The light she'd seen last night was gone, but she remembered its flicker. Someone had been out there. She opened her door, the hall empty. The portress stared, their faces stern. She walked downstairs, her steps slow, her eyes catching every detail. A scuff on the floor, a candle burned low. The drawing room was empty, the table cleared of last night's candles. She stood by the window, looking out. The grounds were wild, the lawn choked with weeds. A path led to the trees, where the light had been. Footsteps approached, and Clara appeared, her face pale. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice shaky. "Breakfast is ready. This way." Miss Marple nodded and followed, her eyes on Clara's back. The dining room was long, its table set for 5. Edward was there, reading a paper. Drake was piling his plate with eggs. Evelyn sat by the window, sipping coffee, her eyes cold. They looked up as Miss Marple entered, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. "Good morning," Miss Marple said, her smile warm. She sat, her hands folded. "I hope you all slept well." Drake grinned, his mouth full. "Like a log, Miss Marple. And you? Old houses can be spooky." She smiled. "Oh, I'm used to creaks and drocks, but it's a fine house, full of history." Evelyn rolled her eyes, but Edward folded his paper. "History is the problem," he said. "Too much of it." Clara poured tea was quiet, the clink of cups loud in the silence. Miss Marple ate slowly, watching. Drake talked too much, Evelyn too little. Clara's hands shook, and Edward's eyes darted to the door. They were all nervous, hiding something. She thought of the will, the test, the fortune, and the light outside, flickering in the dark. Breakfast ended, and Edward stood. "Miss Marple, we'll meet in the study at 10. We'll explain the will then." She nodded, her face calm. "I look forward to it." Clara led her back to her room, the house, cold and heavy. Miss Marple sat by the window, her knitting in her lap. The mist was lifting, but the grounds were still dark. She thought of the letter, the people, the secrets. Blackwood Hall was a trap, but she'd find the bait. She always did. Chapter 4. Whispers in the drawing room. The morning light struggled through the heavy curtains of Blackwood Hall, casting pale streaks across the drawing room. Miss Jane Marple sat in a high-backed chair, her handbag on her lap, her knitting needles still for now. The room was grand but worn, with faded wallpaper and a chandelier that creaked faintly in the draft. The air held a chill, despite the weak fire in the grate, and it smelled of old books and wax. Edward Blackwood stood by the fireplace, his face tight. Clara hovered near a table, her fingers twisting a handkerchief. Lionel Drake lounged in an armchair, his gold watch chain glinting, while Evelyn Shaw leaned against a window, her silk dress catching the light. The silence was thick, broken only by the clock's steady tick. Miss Marple's eyes moved from one to the other, her face calm, but her mind sharp. She'd been summoned to this meeting in the study, but Edward had led them here instead, saying the study was not ready. That caught her attention. A locked room, perhaps, he noted Clara's quick glance at Edward, Drake's forced smile, and Evelyn's bored sigh. They were all hiding something, and this room felt like a stage set for secrets. Edward cleared his throat, his voice low but firm. Miss Marple, thank you for joining us. We need to explain the will. It's complicated. She nodded, her smile gentle. Wills often are, Mr. Blackwood, especially when there's money involved. Drake chuckled, too loud for the quiet room. Money and trouble, eh? You've got a sharp head, Miss Marple. Evelyn rolled her eyes, her voice sharp. Let's not waste time, Edward. Tell her the truth. The will's a game, and we're all stuck playing it. Clara flinched, her handkerchief now a tight knot in her hands. Miss Marple's eyes flicked to her, then back to Edward. A game, she asked, her tone mild. That sounds unusual. Edward sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. It is. Our father, he wasn't an easy man. When he died, his will had rules. Only one of us, Clara, or me, can inherit Blackwood Hall and the fortune. But there's a test. We have to prove we're worthy. Miss Marple tilted her head, her hands folded. Worthy. That's a strange word for a will. What's the test? Drake leaned forward, his mustache twitching. It's a bit of a puzzle, Miss Marple. Old Mr. Blackwood loved his riddles. The will says the heir must find something hidden in the house. A document, maybe, or an object. Whoever finds it first gets everything. Miss Marple's eyebrows rose, but her face stayed calm. A treasure hunt. She'd heard of odd wills before, but this one felt wrong, like a trap set to catch more than an heir. And where do I come in? She asked. I'm no treasure hunter. Clara spoke, her voice trembling. We need someone fair, Miss Marple, someone to watch, to make sure it's done right. The village says you're honest. You see things others don't. Miss Marple smiled, but her mind was turning. They kept saying that's her reputation, but how did they know? She hadn't seen Clara or Edward in years, and Drake and Evelyn were strangers. Someone had been asking about her, spreading her name. She glanced at Evelyn, who was staring out the window, her face cold, then at Drake, whose smile was too wide. Edward's eyes were on the floor, avoiding hers. They weren't telling her everything. Tell me more about this test, she said, her voice soft. What are you looking for? Edward hesitated, then pulled a folded paper from his pocket. This is part of the will, he said, handing it to her. It's all we have. Miss Marple unfolded the paper, her fingers careful. The handwriting was old, the ink faded but clear. It read, The heart of Blackwood lies hidden, where shadows guard the past. Seek it where the first light falls, but beware the cost. Only the true heir will see, and the rest will fall. She read it twice, her eyes sharp, a riddle, vague but heavy with meaning. Shadows, light, a cost. She looked up, her face calm. This is poetic, she said, but not very clear. Where does the first light fall? Drake shrugged, his voice too cheerful. That's the trick, isn't it? The old man loved his secrets. Could be anywhere in this pile of stones. Evelyn turned from the window, her voice sharp. It's nonsense. He was mad, and this is his last joke. We're chasing ghosts. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. Edward took the paper back, his jaw tight. It's not nonsense, he said. It's here, somewhere, and we'll find it. Miss Marple nodded, her hands still. And you want me to watch? To make sure it's fair? Edward nodded. Yes, and to help, if you can. You're good at puzzles. She smiled, but her mind was racing. A riddle, a hidden prize, a family at odds, and her, pulled into the middle. Why? She thought of the letter, the wax seal, the name E. Blackwood, Edward, or someone else. She glanced at Clara, whose hands were shaking now. At Drake, who was watching her too closely. At Evelyn, who seemed to care too little. The room felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. I'll do what I can, she said, her voice gentle, but I'll need to know the house. And you. Secrets don't stay hidden if you look in the right places. Drake laughed, but it sounded forced. You'll have your work cut out, Miss Marple. This house is full of shadows. Evelyn smirked, and not just shadows. "Watch your step, old lady." Clara gasped, but Miss Marple only smiled. She'd heard worse, and Evelyn's sharp tongue told her something anger or fear. She filed it away, like a stitch in her knitting. Edward stood. "We'll start tomorrow. You can explore the house today. Miss Marple, Clara will show you around." Miss Marple nodded and rose, her handbag on her arm. Clara led her out, her steps quick and nervous. The hall was cold, the portraits watching. They walked through dusty corridors, past locked doors and faded tapestries. Clara pointed out rooms: a library, a parlor, a dining hall, but her voice was flat, like she was afraid to say too much. Miss Marple listened, her eyes catching details: a scuff on the floor, a curtain pulled too tight, a key left in a lock. They reached the library, its shelves towering with old books. Clara stopped, her face pale. "This was Father's favorite room," she said. "He spent hours here." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes scanning the shelves. Dust coated the books, but some were disturbed, their spines misaligned. Someone had been searching. "A good place for secrets," she said, her voice light. "Books hide things well." Clara's eyes widened, but she said nothing. They moved on, through more halls and staircases. The house was a maze, its rooms dark and heavy. Miss Marple noted every detail: the creak of a floorboard, the smell of damp stone, a window left cracked. Blackwood Hall was alive, and it was watching her as much as she watched it. They returned to her room by noon. Clara left quickly, her face still pale. Miss Marple sat by the window, her knitting in her lap. The grounds outside were wild, the trees dark in the mist. She thought of the riddle where the first light falls, a window, maybe, or something deeper, tied to the house's past. She'd need to see more, hear more. Lunch was served in the dining room, the table set for 5. Drake talked too much, Evelyn too little. Clara barely ate, and Edward kept looking at the door. Miss Marple sipped her soup, her eyes gentle but sharp. They were all nervous, their words careful. She asked small questions about the house, the family, the will, but their answers were vague. Drake bragged about his business in London. Evelyn mentioned a trip abroad. Clara and Edward said little, their eyes on their plates. After lunch, Miss Marple explored alone. She walked the halls, her steps slow, her eyes catching everything. A portrait of old Mr. Blackwood hung in a corridor, his face stern. She studied it, noting the eyes so like Edward's, but colder. A door nearby was locked, its handle stiff. She moved on, finding a staircase to the attic. The door was open, but the air was thick with dust. She didn't go up, not yet. Evening came, and dinner was tense. Evelyn snapped at Clara, who flinched. Drake drank too much wine, his face red. Edward was quiet, his eyes on Miss Marple. She smiled, her voice light, but she missed nothing. After dinner, they returned to the drawing room. The candles were lit again, their flames casting shadows. Miss Marple sat, her knitting in her hands, her eyes on the others. Drake spoke first, his voice loud. "So, Miss Marple, any ideas about that riddle? You're the clever one." She smiled. "It's early days, Mr. Drake. Riddles take time, but I'll watch and listen." Evelyn snorted. "You'll need more than that. This house is a tomb." Clara shivered, and Edward shot Evelyn a look. Miss Marple's needles clicked, steady and sure. The room was full of secrets, and she'd find them. She always did. The evening ended early. Clara led her back to her room, the house creaking around them. "Sleep well, Miss Marple," Clara said, her voice small. "You too, my dear," Miss Marple replied, her eyes kind. But as the door closed, she thought of the riddle, the will, the test, and the light she'd seen outside last night, flickering in the dark. Someone was moving, planning. She'd need to be careful. She checked her room window locked, bag safe. She undressed and slipped into bed, the sheets cold. The house was quiet now, but not still. Footsteps passed her door, soft and quick. A voice murmured, too low to hear. Miss Marple lay awake, her mind turning. Blackwood Hall was a puzzle, and she was deep in it. Tomorrow would bring more pieces. She closed her eyes, ready for what came next. Chapter 5. The first clue uncovered. The dawn broke gray over Blackwood Hall, the mist curling around its stone walls like a shroud. Miss Jane Marple woke early, her eyes opening to the faint light seeping through the heavy curtains of her room. The air was cold, the fire in the grate long dead, and the house creaked softly, as if whispering its secrets. She lay still for a moment, her mind already turning over the riddle, the will, and the people she'd met last night. Edward, Clara, Drake, and Evelyn. Each held a piece of the puzzle, but none were showing their full hand. Today, she'd start pulling threads. She rose, her joints stiff but her movements steady, and dressed in her usual tweed skirt and cardigan, pinning her brooch with care. She looked like any old lady from St. Mary Mead, but her blue eyes were sharp, missing nothing. She checked her handbag, handkerchief, spectacles, notebook all in place. Then she moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside. The grounds were dim, the trees dark shapes in the fog. She thought of the light she'd seen 2 nights ago, flickering near the trees. It hadn't reappeared last night, but she hadn't forgotten it. Someone was moving in the dark. Downstairs, the house was quiet, the halls lit by weak morning light. Miss Marple walked slowly, her shoes hushed on the stone floor. The portraits on the walls watched her, their stern faces like silent guards. She paused at the drawing room door, listening. No sound, but she felt the house wasn't empty. Someone was awake, watching as she did. She moved on, her eyes catching details: a scuff on the floor, a curtain slightly askew, a candle burned too low. In the dining room, breakfast was laid out: bread, eggs, tea, but no one was there. She sat, pouring tea, her mind on the riddle. The heart of Blackwood lies hidden, where shadows guard the past. Seek it where the first light falls, but beware the cost. The words rolled in her head, each one heavy. First light, a window, maybe, catching the sunrise. Or something deeper, tied to the Blackwood family. She sipped her tea, the cup warm, and waited. Clara appeared first, her face pale, her green dress swapped for a plain gray one. "Good morning, Miss Marple," she said, her voice small. She sat, her hands twisting a napkin. "Did you sleep?" Well enough," Miss Marple said, her smile gentle. "Old houses have their noises, don't they?" Clara nodded, her eyes darting to the door. "They do. This one. It never feels quiet." Miss Marple tilted her head, noting Clara's nerves. "Houses hold memories," she said. "Some louder than others. Your father loved this place, didn't he?" Clara's hands stilled. "He did. Too much, maybe. It consumed him." Before Miss Marple could ask more, Edward entered, his face tight. He nodded to her, then sat, pouring coffee. "Morning, Miss Marple. Ready to help us with this mess?" She smiled. "I'll try, Mr. Blackwood. That riddle of your father's is quite a puzzle." Edward's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Drake bustled in next, his red face cheerful but his eyes sharp. "Morning, all. Hope we're ready to crack this nut, eh, Miss Marple?" She nodded, her eyes gentle. "Nuts do crack, Mr. Drake, with the right pressure." Evelyn was last, gliding in with a silk scarf and a bored look. She took a seat, ignoring Clara, and poured tea without a word. Miss Marple watched them all, her face calm. Clara's nerves, Edward's tension, Drake's false cheer, Evelyn's cold distance. They were all playing parts. But what were they hiding? Breakfast was quiet, the clink of cups loud in the silence. Miss Marple ate slowly, asking small questions. "This house must have many rooms," she said. "Have you searched them all?" Drake laughed. "Not yet, Miss Marple. It's a big place. Takes time." Evelyn smirked. "And courage. Some rooms feel wrong." Clara shivered, and Edward shot Evelyn a look. Miss Marple filed it away. "Wrong how? Haunted, or hiding something?" She finished her tea and stood. "I'd like to see more of the house," she said. "If you don't mind." Edward nodded. "Clara will show you. We'll meet in the drawing room at noon to discuss the will further." Clara led her out, her steps quick. They walked through dusty halls, past locked doors and faded tapestries. Miss Marple noted every detail: a cobweb disturbed, a rug slightly turned, a keyhole scratched. The house was old, but it wasn't still. Someone had been searching, and not carefully. They reached the library again, its shelves heavy with books. Clara paused, her voice low. Father spent hours here. He'd lock the door, sometimes for days. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes on the shelves. Some books were out of place, their dust smudged. A good place for secrets, she said. May I look? Clara hesitated, then nodded. Miss Marple stepped forward, her fingers trailing the spines. Most were old history, poetry, law, but one caught her eye. A thin book, its leather cover, worn, tucked between larger ones. She pulled it out, her movements slow. It was a journal, the pages yellowed, the ink faded. She opened it carefully, her heart quickening. The handwriting was old Mr. Blackwood's, sharp and slanted. The first page read, "To my heir, the heart is yours, if you see where light begins." She closed the journal, her face calm. A clue, or a trick. She slipped it back, noting its exact place. Clara hadn't seen, her eyes on the window. "A fine library," Miss Marple said, her voice light. "Let's see more." They moved on, through parlors and galleries. But Miss Marple's mind was on the journal, "Where light begins." It echoed the riddle, but it wasn't enough. She needed more. Clara showed her a music room, its piano dusty, and a conservatory with cracked glass. Each room held hint scratches on a lock. A chair moved, a curtain pulled. The house was being searched, and not just by Edward and Clara. At noon, they returned to the drawing room. Edward, Drake, and Evelyn were there, the air heavy. Edward held the will's riddle, his face grim. "Any thoughts, Miss Marple?" he asked. She smiled. "It's early, Mr. Blackwood, but I wonder, where does the first light fall in this house?" Drake laughed. "East wing, I guess. Sunrise is there." Evelyn snorted. "If it were that simple, we'd have found it." Clara said nothing, her hands tight. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gentle. "Houses have many lights," she said, "and many shadows." The talk turned to planned searching rooms, checking attics. Miss Marple listened, her knitting now in her hands, the needles clicking softly. They were all eager, but their eyes told different stories. Drake's were greedy, Evelyn's cold, Edward's worried, Clara's scared. She let them talk, her mind on the journal. She'd return to the library later, alone. Lunch was tense, Evelyn snapping at Clara, Drake drinking too much. Edward was quiet, his eyes on Miss Marple. She smiled, her questions small but pointed. "This house must have stories," she said. "Old Mr. Blackwood was particular, wasn't he?" Clara nodded, her voice small. "He was. He loved riddles, games, but they weren't always kind." Evelyn laughed. "Sharp, kind. He was a tyrant. This will prove it." Edward's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Miss Marple filed it away. A tyrant, that fit the old man, she remembered. But what game was he playing now? After lunch, she excused herself, saying she needed rest. Instead, she slipped to the library, her steps quiet. The journal was still there, untouched. She opened it again, scanning the pages. Most were notes, business stats, family quarrels. But one page stood out, tucked near the back. It was a sketch, rough but clear, a window with the sun rising behind it. And below, the words, "The heart lies where shadows end." Her pulse quickened, but she kept her face calm. She closed the journal and returned it, memorizing its place. The sketch was a clue, tying to the riddle. A window in the east wing, perhaps, or something symbolic, tied to the family's past. She'd need to see the house at dawn, when the first light fell. She left the library, her heart steady. The house was quiet, but she heard footsteps above, quick and soft. Someone was moving, searching. She returned to her room, her mind turning. The journal was a start, but it wasn't enough. The riddle, the will, the test, they were all part of something bigger. And the light outside, 2 nights ago, it nagged at her. Someone was out there, watching. Dinner was quiet, the air thick, with unspoken words. Miss Marple watched, her smile gentle. Clara barely ate. Edward stared at his plate. Drake talked too much. Evelyn's eyes were sharp. After, they gathered in the drawing room again. Edward spoke of searching the East Wing tomorrow. Miss Marple nodded, saying little. She'd be there, watching Dot back in her room. She checked the window locked, as always. She sat, her knitting in her lap, the needles still. The house creaked, a door thudded far off. She thought of the journal, the sketch, the riddle. Where shadows end. She'd find it, but she'd need to be careful. Blackwood Hall was a trap, and she was walking its edges. She slept lightly, waking to every sound, a creak, a whisper, a step. Dawn was coming, and with it, the first light. She'd be ready. Chapter 6. An unexpected guest. The first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, slipping through the mist that clung to Blackwood Hall's grounds. Miss Jane Marple was already awake, her eyes open before the light touched her window. The room was cold, the air heavy with the musty scent of old wood and damp stone. She lay still for a moment, her mind sifting through the riddle, the journal, and the sketch she'd found yesterday. The heart lies where shadows end. The words echoed, sharp and clear, pulling her toward the East Wing, where the first light might fall. But something else nagged at her, the flickering light she'd seen outside 2 nights ago, and the footsteps in the hall last night. Blackwood Hall was alive with secrets, and she was determined to unravel them. She rose, her joints stiff, but her movements sure, and dressed in her usual tweed skirt and cardigan, her brooch pinned neatly. Her handbag sat, ready handkerchief, spectacles, notebook, all in place. She moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside. The grounds were gray, the trees dark shapes in the fog. No lantern flickered now, but she felt watched, the hairs on her neck prickling. She let the curtain fall and checked her door locked as she'd left it. The house was quiet, but not still. Someone was always moving. Downstairs, the halls were dim, the portraits on the walls staring down like silent judges. Miss Marple walked slowly, her shoes hushed on the stone floor. She headed for the East Wing, where the riddle hinted the first light might fall. The corridors were narrow here, the air colder, the windows tall and streaked with grime. She paused at one, watching the sunrise paint the glass in soft gold. The light spilled across the floor, touching a faded rug and a locked door opposite. She noted it, her mind turning. A locked door in the East Wing, another piece of the puzzle, she continued, her eyes catching details, scuff on the baseboard, a curtain pulled loose, a cobweb torn. Someone had been here, searching. She reached a small parlor, its windows facing east. The light was stronger now, streaming through cracked panes. She stood in the center, watching where it fell. The rays hit a bookshelf, its wood worn but sturdy. She stepped closer, her fingers trailing the spines. Dust coated most, but one book, a slim volume of poetry, was clean, as if recently touched. She pulled it out, her heart quickening. Tucked inside was a scrap of paper, yellowed and brittle. It read, in the same sharp handwriting as the journal, "Look where the light meets the dark dot." Miss Marple's lips pursed. Another clue, tying to the riddle and the sketch. She slipped the paper into her pocket, returning the book exactly as she'd found it. She'd need to come back later, when the house was busier. For now, she moved on, her steps careful. The East Wing felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. Breakfast was waiting in the dining room, the table set for 5. Clara was there, her face pale, her hands twisting a napkin. Edward sat stiffly, his coffee untouched. Drake was piling eggs onto his plate, his red face cheerful, but his eyes sharp. Evelyn leaned by the window, her silk dress catching the light, her expression cold. Miss Marple took her seat, her smile gentle. "Good morning," she said. "A fine day for a puzzle, isn't it?" Drake laughed, too loud. "You're keen, Miss Marple. Found that treasure yet?" She smiled, her eyes soft. "Not yet, Mr. Drake, but houses like this have many secrets." Evelyn snorted, her voice sharp. "Secrets? This place is a crypt, full of dust and bad memories." Clara flinched, and Edward's jaw tightened. Miss Marple noted it, all their nerves, their stirkampf, their silences. She sipped her tea, asking, "Have you searched the East Wing yet? The light's lovely there this morning." Edward looked up, his eyes narrow. The east wing. Why, there. The riddle, Miss Marple said lightly. It speaks of the first light. The east wing seemed a good place to start. Drake grinned. Clever, eh? You'll have this solved by supper. Evelyn rolled her eyes. If it's that easy, why are we still here? Miss Marple smiled, saying nothing. The scrap of paper in her pocket felt heavy. Look where the light meets the dark. She'd keep it to herself for now. Breakfast ended, and Edward stood. We'll search the east wing today. Miss Marple, you're welcome to join us. She nodded. I'd like that. A fresh pair of eyes can help. Clara led her to the east wing, the others trailing behind. The parlor was as she'd left it, the sunlight now brighter. They searched bookshelves, cabinets, under rugs but found nothing. Miss Marple watched, her knitting in her hands, her needles clicking softly. Drake was careless, knocking books aside. Evelyn was bored, checking her nails. Clara and Edward were thorough, their faces tense. No one noticed the poetry book, and Miss Marple didn't mention it. At noon, a bell rang, sharp and sudden. Clara gasped. The front door, she said, hurrying out. The others followed. Miss Marple last, her steps slow but steady. In the hall, Clara opened the door, revealing a man tall, thin, with a gray coat and a sharp face. His eyes flicked over them, lingering on Miss Marple. Mr. Victor Hargreave, he said, his voice clipped. I'm here about the will. Edward's face darkened. Hargreave, father's lawyer. Hargreave nodded, stepping inside. I was delayed, but I'm here to oversee the test and to ensure fairness. His eyes met Miss Marple's again, and she smiled, her heart quickening. An unexpected guest, another player in the game. Drake laughed, slapping Hargreave's shoulder. About time. We're lost in this riddle. Evelyn crossed her arms. Another watchdog. Wonderful. Clara looked nervous, her hands twisting. Miss Marple watched Hargreave, noting his stiff posture, his sharp gaze. He knew something, and he wasn't here just for fairness. She followed them to the drawing room, where Hargreave set a briefcase on the table. The will is clear, he said, opening the case. Only one heir can inherit, by solving the riddle. I'm here to observe and validate. He pulled out a copy of the riddle, reading it aloud. The heart of Blackwood lies hidden, where shadows guard the past. Seek it where the first light falls, but beware the cost. Miss Marple listened, her face calm. The scrap of paper in her pocket burned. Hargreave's arrival changed things. Was he friend or foe? She glanced at Clara, pale and trembling. Edward, tense and silent. Drake, too cheerful. Evelyn, cold as ice. Hargreave's eyes were on her again, and she smiled back. Gentle, but alert. Lunch was tense. Hargreave's presence like a shadow. He spoke little, watching everything. Miss Marple asked small questions about the will, the family, the house, but his answers were short, polite, empty. The others were uneasy, their eyes darting to him. After lunch, Hargreave joined the search, his sharp eyes missing nothing. Miss Marple stayed close, her knitting in her hands, her mind on the poetry book and the scrap of paper. The east wing yielded nothing new, but Miss Marple's thoughts were on Hargreave. He moved with purpose, checking corners the others ignored. Did he know about the journal, the sketch, the scrap? She'd need to watch him closely. Dinner was quiet, the air thick with suspicion. Hargreave sat at the head, his briefcase beside him. Miss Marple smiled, her questions light. You must know this house well, Mr. Hargreave. Any guesses about the riddle? He looked at her, his face unreadable. It's a puzzle, Miss Marple. But puzzles have answers. She nodded, her eyes gentle. He was careful, like her. The evening ended early, and Clara led her to her room. Be careful, Clara whispered. Mr. Hargreave, he's not what he seems. Miss Marple touched her arm. Thank you, my dear. I'll watch. Alone in her room, she checked the window locked. She sat, her knitting still, her mind racing. The scrap of paper, the journal, the sketch, Hargreave's arrival. The riddle was growing, and so was the danger. She thought of St. Mary Mead, its sunny lanes, so far away. But the game was here, and she was playing. The house creaked, Footsteps passed her door. She lay awake, listening. Dawn would come again, and with it, more clues. She was ready. Chapter 7. Shadows in the garden. The morning mist hung low over Blackwood Hall, wrapping the grounds in a gray veil. Miss Jane Marple woke before dawn, her eyes opening to the faint glow beyond her window. The room was cold, the air heavy with the scent of old wood and damp earth. She lay still, her mind turning over the clues she'd gathered. The journal, the sketch, the scrap of paper with its cryptic note, "Look where the light meets the dark." The riddle still nagged at her, tangled with the arrival of Victor Hargreave, the lawyer with sharp eyes and guarded words. And then there was the light she'd seen outside, flickering in the trees 2 nights ago. It hadn't returned, but it lingered in her thoughts, like a loose thread in her knitting. She rose, her joints stiff but her movements steady, and dressed in her usual tweed skirt and cardigan, her brooch pinned neatly. Her handbag was ready, handkerchief, spectacles, notebook, and a scrap of paper tucked safely inside. She moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside. The grounds were dim, the trees dark shapes in the fog. No light flickered now, but she felt the garden held answers. She'd explore it today, after the others were busy. For now, she checked her door locked, as she'd left it tanned, headed downstairs. Her shoes hushed on the stone floor. The halls were quiet, the portraits watching with stern eyes. She paused at the east wing, where the first light had fallen yesterday. The locked door she'd noticed still stood shut, its handle stiff. She made a mental note to ask Clara about it. The house felt alive, its creaks and sighs like whispers of secrets. She reached the dining room, where breakfast was laid out: bread, jam, tea, but only Clara was there, her face pale, her hands twisting a napkin. "Good morning, my dear," Miss Marple said, her smile gentle. "Another early riser, I see." Clara started, her eyes wide. "Oh, Miss Marple, yes, I couldn't sleep. This house." Her voice trailed off, and she glanced at the door. Miss Marple sat, pouring tea. "Houses like this can be restless," she said. "All those old stories. Have you searched the garden yet? The riddle mentions shadows, and gardens have plenty of those." Clara's hand stilled. "The garden, no. We've stayed inside. It's overgrown, wild. Father never cared for it after Mother died." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes soft but sharp. "A neglected garden. A good place to hide something or someone." She sipped her tea, letting Clara talk. The girl mentioned the east wing, saying it was her father's favorite part of the house. He'd sit there at dawn, she said, watching the light. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. Dawn, light, the east wing. It fit the riddle and the scrap of paper. She filed it away as Edward entered, his face drawn. He nodded to her, then sat, his coffee untouched. Drake bustled in next, his red face too cheerful, followed by Evelyn, her silk dress rustling, her eyes cold. Hargreave was last, his gray coat neat, his sharp gaze sweeping the room. Miss Marple smiled, noting his watchfulness. He was no mere lawyer. Breakfast was tense, the clink of cups loud in the silence. Miss Marple asked small questions. "The garden must be lovely," she said, "even if it's wild. Have you walked it, Mr. Hargreave?" He looked at her, his face unreadable. "Not yet, Miss Marple. But I agree. Gardens hide things. I'll look today." She nodded, her smile gentle. His answer was careful, like hers. Evelyn snorted. "The garden's a jungle. Good luck finding anything but thorns." Drake laughed. "Thorns and treasure, maybe. What do you think, Miss Marple?" She smiled. "I think gardens tell stories, Mr. Drake. You just have to listen." Edward's jaw tightened, and Clara's hand shook. Miss Marple watched them all, her needles clicking softly in her lap. Hargreave's eyes lingered on her, and she met his gaze, her face calm. He knew something, and so did she. The scrap of paper in her pocket felt heavy. After breakfast, Edward announced another search of the east wing. "We'll try the parlor again," he said. "Miss Marple, join us." "Of course," she said, but her mind was on the garden. She'd slip away later, when they were distracted. The search was thorough, but fruitless. Bookshelves, cabinets, under rugs. Miss Marple stayed quiet, watching. Drake was sloppy, Evelyn bored, Clara nervous, Edward tense. Hargreave moved with purpose, his eyes on every corner. No one touched the poetry book, and Miss Marple didn't mention it. At 11, she excused herself, saying she needed air. Clara offered to come, but Miss Marple waved her off. "I'll be fine, my dear. Just a short walk." She slipped out a side door, her handbag on her arm, and stepped into the garden. The air was damp, the ground soft under her shoes. The garden was wild roses tangled with weeds, paths choked with grass. She walked slowly, her eyes scanning the ground, the trees, the shadows. Near a stone bench, she paused. The grass was trampled, as if someone had stood there recently. She knelt, her fingers brushing the earth. A faint mark caught her Aja heel print, deep and sharp. A man's boot, perhaps. She thought of the light she'd seen, flickering here 2 nights ago. Someone had been watching the house. She stood, her heart steady, and moved deeper into the garden. A low wall ran along the edge, its stones mossy. Behind it, hidden by ivy, was a small gate. Its lock rusted, but new scratches glinted on the metal. Someone had opened it, and recently. She didn't touch it, but noted its place. Beyond the gate, a path led to the trees, where the light had flickered. She'd come back at dusk, when shadows were long. A noise behind her made her turn, a twig snapping. Hargreave stood there, his gray coat blending with the mist. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth, exploring. She smiled, her eyes gentle. "Just a stroll, Mr. Hargreave. The garden's quite revealing." His eyes narrowed, but he nodded. "It is. Be careful. Old gardens can be dangerous." She tilted her head. "So can old houses, but I'm used to both." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He walked away, his steps quick. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind racing. Hargreave was no bystander. He was searching, just like the others. But for what? She returned to the house, her shoes damp. Lunch was waiting, the dining room heavy with tension. Clara was pale, Edward silent, Drake too loud, Evelyn sharp. Hargreave watched them all, his face blank. Miss Marple smiled, her questions light. "The garden's lovely," she said, "though I saw a gate, half hidden. Does it lead anywhere?" Edward's fork paused. "The old orchard," he said. "It's locked. No one goes there." Clara's eyes widened, but she said nothing. Miss Marple nodded, filing it away. The orchard, another place to check. Lunch ended, and the group returned to the drawing room. Edward spoke of searching the attic next, but Miss Marple's thoughts were on the garden gate, the heel print, the flickering light. She excused herself in the afternoon, saying she needed rest. Instead, she slipped back to the library, her steps quiet. The poetry book was still there, untouched. She checked the scrap of paper in her pocket. "Look, where the light meets the dark." The garden gate, hidden in ivy, felt like the place where light and shadow met. She'd check it at dusk, when the others were busy. Dinner was tense, Evelyn snapping at Clara, Drake drinking too much. Hargreave watched, his eyes sharp. Miss Marple smiled, her question small. "The orchard sounds charming," she said. "Does anyone visit it?" Clara shook her head, her voice small. "It's overgrown. Father hated it." Edward's eyes flicked to Hargreave, then away. Miss Marple noted it. The orchard was important, and they didn't want her there. After dinner, she returned to her room, her knitting in her lap. She waited until the house quieted, then slipped downstairs, her coat on, her handbag light. The garden was dark, the mist thicker now. She moved to the gate, her steps careful. The lock was still scratched, and the gate creaked open with a push. Beyond, the orchard was wild, its trees gnarled. She paused, her eyes scanning the shadows. A faint glow caught her Aja lantern, moving between the trees. Her heart quickened, but she stayed still, hidden by the wall. The lantern stopped, and a figure emerged, tall, in a dark coat. Not Hargreave, someone new. The figure knelt, digging in the earth. Miss Marple watched, her breath slow. They were searching, just like inside the house. But for what? She stepped back, the gate creaking softly. The figure froze, the lantern swinging toward her. She slipped into the shadows, her heart steady. The lantern moved away, and the figure vanished into the trees. She returned to the house, her mind racing. A stranger in the orchard, digging at night. Another piece of the puzzle. Back in her room, she locked the door, her knitting untouched. The house creaked, footsteps passed, voices murmured. She thought of the riddle, the scrap, the journal, the stranger. Blackwood Hall was a web, and she was caught in it. But she'd find the truth. She always did. Chapter 8. The Locked Study. The dawn light filtered through the heavy curtains of Blackwood Hall, casting faint shadows across Miss Jane Marple's room. She woke early, her eyes opening to the gray stillness before the sun fully rose. The air was cold, the scent of old wood and damp stone lingering like a memory. Her mind was already turning, piecing together the clues she'd gathered: the journal, the sketch, the scrap of paper, and now the stranger in the orchard, digging under lantern light. The riddle, the heart of Blackwood, lies hidden, where shadows guard the past, felt closer, yet still out of reach. And Victor Hargreaves' sharp eyes, watching her as closely as she watched him, added another layer to the puzzle. Today, she'd push deeper into the house, starting with the locked door in the east wing. She rose, her joints stiff, but her movements steady, and dressed in her tweed skirt and cardigan, pinning her brooch with care. Her handbag was ready, handkerchief, spectacles, notebook, and the scrap of paper tucked safely inside. She moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside. The grounds were misty, the orchard hidden by fog. No lantern glowed now, but the image of the stranger digging stayed sharp in her mind. Who were they, and what were they seeking in the dark? She checked her door locked, as always, and headed downstairs, her shoes soft on the stone floor. The halls were quiet, the portrait's stern eyes following her. She paused at the east wing, where the locked door she'd noted yesterday stood shut. Its handle was old, tarnished, but the lock looked new, its metal gleaming faintly. She touched it lightly, feeling its resistance. A keyhole, scratched around the edges, hinted at recent use. She'd asked Clara about it, but carefully. The house creaked, and she moved on, her eyes catching every detail: a cobweb torn, a rug slightly askew, a candle burned low in the dining room. Breakfast was laid out: bread, eggs, tea, but only Edward was there, his face drawn, his coffee untouched. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low. "Sleep well?" "Well enough," she replied, her smile gentle. "Old houses have their noises, don't they?" He nodded, his eyes flicking to the door. "Too many noises." Miss Marple sat pouring tea, her mind on the locked door. "The east wing's lovely at dawn," she said lightly, "though I noticed a locked door there. Your father's study, perhaps." Edward's cup paused midway to his lips. "The study, it's been locked for years. No one goes in." She nodded, her eyes soft but sharp. "A pity studies often hold secrets." Before he could answer, Clara entered, her face pale, her hands twisting a napkin. "Good morning," she mumbled, sitting quickly. Drake bustled in next, his red face too cheerful, followed by Evelyn, her silk dress rustling, her eyes cold. Hargreave was last, his gray coat neat, his gaze sweeping the room. Miss Marple smiled, noting his watchfulness. He sat, his movements precise, like a man used to control. Breakfast was tense, the clink of cups loud in the silence. Miss Marple asked small questions. "The study must be dusty by now," she said. "Does anyone have the key?" Clara's hand stilled, and Edward's jaw tightened. Drake laughed, too loud. "Locked tight, Miss Marple. Old man Blackwood's secrets, eh?" Evelyn smirked. "If there's treasure, it's not in that moldy room." Hargreaves' eyes flicked to Miss Marple, his face unreadable. "The study's irrelevant," he said. "The riddle points elsewhere." She smiled, her needles clicking softly in her lap. "Perhaps," she said, "but houses hide things in odd places." The talk turned to the East Wing search, but Miss Marple's thoughts were on the study. A new lock, scratched keyhole, Edward's quick denial. It was important, and they didn't want her there. Breakfast ended, and Edward stood. "We'll search the attic today. Miss Marple, join us." "Of course," she said, but her mind was on the study. She'd find a way in, alone. The group moved to the attic, a dim space of trunks and cobwebs. They searched old clothes, broken chairs, dusty papers, but found nothing. Miss Marple watched, her knitting in her hands. Drake was careless, Evelyn bored, Clara nervous, Edward tense. Hargreave was thorough, his eyes sharp, but he stayed near Miss Marple, as if watching her dot at noon. She excused herself, saying she needed rest. Instead, she slipped to the east wing, her steps quiet. The locked door was still shut, its keyhole gleaming. She knelt, her eyes level with the lock. The scratches were fresh, deep, as if someone had fumbled with a key or a pick. She stood, her heart steady, and moved to the library, where the poetry book and journal were hidden. Both were untouched, but she checked a scrap of paper in her pocket. Look where the light meets the dark. The study, locked and guarded, felt like the place where light and shadow met. She returned to the dining room for lunch, the air heavy with tension. Clara was pale, Edward silent, Drake too loud, Evelyn sharp. Hargreave watched, his eyes flicking to Miss Marple. She smiled, her questions light. "The study sounds intriguing," she said. "Why keep it locked?" Edward's fork clattered. "It's nothing," he said quickly. "Just private." Clara's eyes widened, and Hargreave's lips twitched. Miss Marple nodded, filing it away. Private meant important. Lunch ended, and the group returned to the drawing room. Edward spoke of searching the west wing next, but Miss Marple's thoughts were on the study. She'd need the key or another way in. In the afternoon, she slipped away again, this time to Clara's room, where a maid was dusting. "Oh, Miss Marple," the maid said, startled. "Can I help you?" Miss Marple smiled. "Just looking for Clara, my dear. Though, I heard about a study, locked tight. Do you know where the key is?" The maid hesitated, her eyes darting. "No, ma'am. It's been locked since the old master died. Miss Clara might know." Miss Marple nodded, thanking her. Clara then. She'd ask, but not directly. She returned to the east wing, pausing at the locked door. A faint sound came from inside her creak, like a floorboard. She froze, her heart quickening. Someone was in there. She stepped back, her shoes silent, and hid behind a curtain as the door clicked open. Hargreave emerged, his gray coat neat, a small key in his hand. He locked the door, his movements quick, and slipped the key into his pocket. He glanced around, his eyes missing her, and walked away, his steps brisk. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Hargreave had the key, and he'd been inside, alone. She waited until his footsteps faded, then moved to the door, her fingers brushing the lock. The scratches were deeper now, fresh from Hargreave's key. She'd need to get inside, but not yet. Hargreave was watching her, and she'd need to be clever. She returned to the library, her mind racing. The journal and poetry book were still there, but she didn't touch them. Instead, she sat, her knitting in her lap, thinking. The study, the stranger in the orchard, the riddle, they were all connected. Dinner was tense, Evelyn snapping at Clara, Drake drinking too much. Hargreave was quiet, his eyes on Miss Marple. She smiled, her question small. "The east wing's so quiet," she said, "almost like it's hiding something." Edward's jaw tightened, and Clara's hands shook. Hargreave's face stayed blank. "Quiet places often are," he said. "But the riddle's the key." She nodded, her eyes gentle. He was deflecting, but she'd seen the key in his pocket. After dinner, they gathered in the drawing room. Edward spoke of the West Wing search tomorrow, but Miss Marple's thoughts were on the study. She'd need to get that key, or find another way in. Back in her room, she locked the door, her knitting untouched. The house creaked, footsteps passed, voices murmured. She thought of Hargreave, the stranger, the locked door. She checked her window-locked hand, sat, her mind turning. The study was the heart of the mystery, and she'd find a way inside. But she'd need to be careful. Blackwood Hall was a trap, and the players were moving. She slept lightly, waking to every sound, a creak, a thud, a whisper. Dawn was coming, and with it, More clues. She was ready. Chapter 9. A cryptic note discovered the dawn crept over Blackwood Hall, its faint light barely piercing the heavy mist that cloaked the grounds. Miss Jane Marple woke early, her eyes opening to the gray stillness of her room. The air was cold, carrying the musty scent of old stone and damp wood, and the house creaked softly, as if stirring in its sleep. Her mind was already awake, sorting through the clues she'd gathered: the journal, the sketch, the scrap of paper, the stranger in the orchard, and now Victor Hargreaves' secret visit to the locked study. The riddle, the heart of Blackwood lies hidden, where shadows guard the past, felt closer but still elusive, like a shadow just out of reach. Today, she'd find a way into that study, but she'd need to be clever. Hargreave was watching, and so was someone else. She rose, her joints stiff but her movements steady, and dressed in her tweed skirt and cardigan, pinning her brooch with care. Her handbag was ready: handkerchiefs, spectacles, notebook, and the scrap of paper with its cryptic words. "Look where the light meets the dark." She moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside. The grounds were dim, the orchard hidden in fog. No lantern glowed now, but the memory of the stranger digging under the trees lingered. She let the curtain fall and checked her door locked, as always. The house was quiet, but she felt its pulse, like a heart beating with secrets. She headed downstairs, her shoes hushed on the stone floor. The portraits watched, their stern eyes unyielding. She paused at the east wing, where the locked study door stood shut, its new lock gleaming. The scratches around the keyhole were sharper now, fresh from Hargreaves' visit yesterday. She didn't touch it, but her eyes lingered. The study held answers, and she'd get inside one way or another. In the dining room, breakfast was laid out: bread, jam, tea, but only Clara was there, her face pale, her hands twisting a napkin. "Good morning, Miss Marple," she said, her voice small. "Did you sleep all right?" "Well enough, my dear," Miss Marple replied, her smile gentle. "This house has a way of keeping one awake, doesn't it?" Clara nodded, her eyes darting to the door. "It's never quiet." Miss Marple sat, pouring tea, her mind on the study. "That locked door in the east wing," she said lightly. "Your father's study, I hear, must be full of memories." Clara's hand stilled, her face paling further. "It's private. Father kept it locked, even from us." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes soft but sharp. "Private places often hold the most interesting things." Before Clara could answer, Edward entered, his face drawn, his coffee cup gripped tightly. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said, sitting quickly. Drake bustled in next, his red face too cheerful, followed by Evelyn, her silk dress rustling, her eyes cold. Hargreave was last, his gray coat neat, his sharp gaze sweeping the room. Miss Marple smiled, noting his watchfulness. He sat, his movements precise, like a man guarding a secret. Breakfast was tense, the clink of cups loud in the silence. Miss Marple asked small questions. "That study must be dusty," she said. "No one's been in since your father died." Edward's jaw tightened. "No one," he said, too quickly. "It's locked tight." Hargreaves' eyes flicked to him, then to Miss Marple. "Irrelevant to the riddle," he said smoothly. "We should focus on the east wing parlors." She smiled, her needles clicking softly in her lap. "Perhaps," she said, "but old rooms have stories." Evelyn snorted. "Stories? This house is a graveyard, full of dust and bad choices." Drake laughed, too loud. "Graveyards hide treasure, eh, Miss Marple?" She nodded, her eyes gentle. "Sometimes, Mr. Drake, if you know where to look." The talk turned to the day's search: more parlors, more attics, but Miss Marple's thoughts were on the study. Edward's quick denial, Clara's nerves, Hargreaves' deflection. They were hiding something, and the study was key. Breakfast ended, and Edward stood. "We'll start in the west wing today. Miss Marple, join us." "Of course," she said, but her mind was elsewhere. She'd slip away later, when they were distracted. The group moved to the west wing, searching dusty rooms and old trunks. Miss Marple watched, her knitting in her hands. Drake was careless, Evelyn bored, Clara nervous, Edward tense. Hargreaves stayed close, his eyes on her. No one found anything, but Miss Marple wasn't looking for the riddle's prize yet. She was looking for a key dot at 11. She excused herself, saying she needed air. Instead, she slipped to the east wing, her steps quiet. The study door was still locked, its keyhole scratched. She paused, listening. No sound, but the air felt heavy, like someone had been there. She moved to the library, where the poetry book and journal were hidden. Both were untouched, but as she scanned the shelves, her eyes caught something new, a small book, tucked behind others. Its cover plain. She pulled it out, her heart quickening. It was a ledger, old and worn, its pages filled with numbers and notes and old Mr. Blackwood's sharp handwriting. Tucked inside was a folded note, its paper crisp, as if newly written. She opened it carefully, her eyes narrowing. It read, "The key lies where the heart beats strongest." Her lips pursed. Another clue, but different. The handwriting wasn't old Mr. Blackwood's. It was fresher, bolder. Someone else had written this, and recently. She slipped the note into her pocket, next to the scrap of paper, and returned the ledger to its place. The key lies where the heart beats strongest. The study, or something deeper, tied to the family. She'd need to watch closer, especially Hargreave. She left the library, her mind racing. The house was quiet, but she heard footsteps above, quick and soft. She moved to the east wing, pausing at the study door. No sound now, but she felt watched. She turned, catching a shadow at the hall's end, someone moving fast. Hargreave, or the stranger from the orchard. She didn't follow, not yet. Lunch was tense, the dining room heavy with unspoken words. Clara was pale, Edward silent, Drake too loud, Evelyn sharp. Hargreave watched, his eyes flicking to Miss Marple. She smiled, her questions light. "The library's quite a treasure," she said. "So many old books. Your father must have loved it, Clara." Clara nodded, her voice small. "He did. He hid things there, sometimes." Edward's fork paused, and Hargreaves' eyes narrowed. Miss Marple filed it away. The library was important, and they knew it. Lunch ended, and the group returned to the drawing room. Edward spoke of searching the cellars next, but Miss Marple's thoughts were on the note. The key lies where the heart beats strongest. She needed that study key, and Hargreave had it. In the afternoon, she slipped to Clara's room, where the maid was folding linens. "Oh, Miss Marple," the maid said, startled, "looking for Miss Clara." "Just to chat," Miss Marple said, her smile gentle. "Though, that study in the east wing. Do you know where the key's kept?" The maid hesitated, her eyes darting. "No, ma'am, it's locked tight. Only Mr. Hargreave's been asking about it." Miss Marple nodded, thanking her. Hargreave, again, she'd need to be cleverer than him. She returned to the east wing, pausing at the study door. No sound, but the scratches on the keyhole were deeper, fresher. She moved to the garden, hoping to clear her thoughts. The air was damp, the ground soft. She paused at the gate to the orchard, its lock still scratched. No one was there now, but the heel print she'd seen yesterday was joined by another, fresher. Someone was still coming, still digging. She returned to the house, her mind on the note. Dinner was tense, Evelyn snapping at Clara, Drake drinking too much. Hargreave was quiet, his eyes on Miss Marple. She smiled, her questions small. "The study must hold memories," she said. "Why keep it locked so tight?" Edward's jaw tightened. "It's just private." Hargreave's lips twitched. "Some doors are best left shut," he said. She nodded, her eyes gentle. He was warning her, but she'd heard warnings before. After dinner, they gathered in the drawing room. Edward spoke of the cellar search tomorrow, but Miss Marple's thoughts were on the study and the note. She'd need to get that key, or find another way in. Back in her room, she locked the door, her knitting untouched. The house creaked, footsteps passed, voices murmured. She checked her window-locked hand, sat, her mind racing. The note, the journal, the scrap, the stranger, Hargreave's key. The riddle was growing, and so was the danger. She thought of St. Mary Mead, its sunny lanes so far away. But the game was here, and she was playing. She slept lightly, waking to every sound, a creak, a thud, a whisper. Dawn was coming, and with it, more clues. She was ready. Chapter 10. Miss Marple's keen observation. The dawn broke softly over Blackwood Hall, its pale light struggling through the thick mist that shrouded the estate. Miss Jane Marple woke before the sun, her eyes opening to the dim gray of her room. The air was cold, heavy with the scent of old stone and faint damp, and the house creaked like it was whispering secrets. Her mind was already turning, weaving together the clues she'd gathered, the journal with its sketch, the scrap of paper, the cryptic note from the ledger. The key lies where the heart beats strongest. The stranger in the orchard, Victor Hargreaves' secret entry to the locked study, and the scratched keyhole all pointed to a deeper game. The riddle, the heart of Blackwood lies hidden where shadows guard the past, was close. But its answer stayed just out of reach. Today, she'd watch closer, listen sharper, and nudge the players into revealing more. She rose, her joints stiff but her movements sure, and dressed in her tweed skirt and cardigan, pinning her brooch neatly. Her handbag was ready, handkerchief, spectacles, notebook, and the 2 notes tucked safely inside. She moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside. The grounds were veiled in fog, the orchard a dark blur. No lantern flickered now, but the memory of the stranger digging under. The trees lingered, sharp as a pin. She let the curtain fall and checked her door locked. As always, the house was quiet, but she felt its pulse, alive with hidden moves. She headed downstairs, her shoes soft on the stone floor. The portraits watched, their stern eyes like silent guards. She paused at the east wing, where the study's locked door stood shut. The scratches on the keyhole gleamed, fresher than yesterday, as if Hargreaves or someone else had been back. She didn't touch it, but her eyes lingered. The study was key, and she'd find a way in. For now, she moved on, noting a new detail, a faint smudge of dirt on the floor, like a boot had brushed it. The stranger from the orchard. Perhaps. She filed it away. In the dining room, breakfast was laid out: bread, eggs, tea, but only Ed Ward was there, his face tight, his coffee untouched. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low. "Up early again." "Old habits," she replied, her smile gentle. "This house keeps one alert, doesn't it?" He nodded, his eyes flicking to the door. "Too alert." Miss Marple sat, pouring tea, her mind on the study. "That locked study," she said lightly. "It must hold such memories. Your father's favorite place, I hear." Edward's cup clinked against its saucer. "It was. But it's private. Nothing there for the riddle." She nodded, her eyes soft but sharp. His quick denial told her plenty. Clara entered, her face pale, her hands twisting a napkin. "Good morning," she mumbled, sitting quickly. Drake bustled in next, his red face too cheerful, followed by Evelyn, her silk dress rustling, her eyes cold. Hargreaves was last, his gray coat neat, his sharp gaze sweeping the room. Miss Marple smiled, noting his watchfulness. He sat, his movements precise, like a man hiding a plan. Breakfast was tense, the clink of cups loud in the silence. Miss Marple asked small questions. "The study sounds so intriguing," she said. "No one's been in 4 years." Clara's hand stilled, her eyes wide. "No. Father kept it locked." Hargreaves' lips twitched. "A dusty old room," he said smoothly. "The riddle's elsewhere." Evelyn snorted. "Dusty or not, this house is a trap. We're wasting time." Drake laughed, too loud. "Traps have prizes, eh, Miss Marple?" She smiled, her needles clicking softly in her lap. "Prizes and pitfalls, Mr. Drake. It's all in where you look." The talk turned to the days searched, the cellars, but Miss Marple's thoughts were on the study and the note. The key lies where the heart beats strongest. The heart, Blackwood Hall itself, or something personal to the family. She watched them, Clara's nerves, Edward's tension, Drake's false cheer, Evelyn's cold distance, Hargreaves' sharp eyes. They were all players, and she was reading their moves. Breakfast ended, and Edward stood. "We'll start in the cellars." Miss Marple join us, of course, she said, but her mind was on the study. She'd slip away later, when they were busy. The group moved to the cellars, a dark maze of stone walls and dusty crates. They searched barrels, shelves, old bottles but found nothing. Miss Marple watched, her knitting in her hands. Drake was sloppy, Evelyn bored, Clara nervous, Edward tense. Hargreave was thorough, his eyes flicking to her. She smiled, her face calm, but she noted his interest. He suspected she knew something. 11. She excused herself, saying she needed rest. Instead, she slipped to the east wing, her steps quiet. The study door was still locked, its keyhole scratched. She paused, listening. No sound, but the smudge of dirt on the floor was gone, as if someone had swept it away. She moved to the library, checking the poetry book and ledger. Both were untouched, but as she scanned the shelves, her eyes caught a glint, something small, wedged behind a book. She pulled it out, her heart quickening. It was a key, old and tarnished, its head shaped like a heart. Her lips pursed. The key lies where the heart beat strongest. Was this the study key? She slipped it into her pocket, her hand steady. She'd try it later, when the house was quiet. For now, she returned the book and left, her mind racing. The key was a breakthrough, but it raised questions. Who hid it, and why in a library? She rejoined the group for lunch, the dining room heavy with tension. Clara was pale, Edward silent, Drake too loud, Evelyn sharp. Hargreave watched, his eyes flicking to Miss Marple. She smiled, her questions light. The library's such a treasure, she said. Your father must have loved hiding things there. Clara's eyes widened, and Edward's fork paused. Hiding things, he said, his voice sharp. Miss Marple nodded, her smile gentle. Books are good for that. Notes, maybe, or keys. Hargreave's gaze sharpened, but he said nothing. Evelyn smirked. Keys to what? This place is a prison. The key in Miss Marple's pocket felt heavy, but she kept her face calm. Lunch ended, and the group returned to the drawing room. Edward spoke of searching the West Wing parlors next, but Miss Marple's thoughts were on the study. She'd try the key tonight. After dinner, in the afternoon, she slipped to Clara's room, where the maid was dusting. Oh, Miss Marple, the maid said, startled, looking for Miss Clara. Just a chat, Miss Marple said, her smile gentle though. That study, have you ever seen a key for it? Old, maybe, with a heart shape. The maid hesitated, her eyes darting. No, ma'am, but Mr. Hargreave's been asking about keys. He's curious. Miss Marple nodded, thanking her. Hargreave again. He was ahead of her, but not for long. She returned to the east wing, pausing at the study door. No sound, but the air felt heavy, like someone had been there. She moved to the garden, needing air. The mist was thinning, the orchard visible now. The gate's lock was still scratched, and a new heel print joined the others, fresher. The stranger was still coming. She returned to the house, her mind on the key. Dinner was tense, Evelyn snapping at Clara, Drake drinking too much. Hargreave was quiet, his eyes on Miss Marple. She smiled, her questions small. The study must hold such history, she said. A heart-shaped key would suit it, don't you think? Edward's jaw tightened, and Clara's hands shook. Hargreave's face stayed blank. An odd choice, he said, but fitting for old Blackwood. She nodded, her eyes gentle. He was testing her, but she'd test him back. After dinner, they gathered in the drawing room. Edward spoke of the parlor search tomorrow, but Miss Marple's thoughts were on the study. She'd try the key tonight, when the house slept. Back in her room, she locked the door, her knitting untouched. The house creaked, footsteps passed, voices murmured. She waited until midnight, then slipped downstairs, her coat over her nightdress, the key in her hand. The east wing was dark, the study door looming. She paused, listening. No sound. She slid the key into the lock, her heart steady. It turned with a soft click, and the door opened. Inside, the study was dim, lit by moonlight through a tall window. Shelves lined the walls, papers scattered on a desk. She stepped in, her eyes scanning. A portrait of old Mr. Blackwood hung above the fireplace, his eyes stern. She moved to the desk, her fingers brushing the papers. One caught her Aja letter, half finished, in the same bold handwriting as the ledger note. It read, "The heart is safe, but the shadows grow. Trust no one." Her pulse quickened, but she kept her face calm. She slipped the letter into her pocket. Next to the notes, the study held more, but footsteps approached, quick, heavy. She stepped behind a curtain, her breath slow. The door creaked, and Hargreave entered, a lantern in his hand. He scanned the room, his eyes missing her, and moved to the desk, rifling through papers. He cursed softly, finding nothing, and left, locking the door behind him. Miss Marple waited, then slipped out, relocking the door. Back in her room, she locked herself in, her mind racing. The letter, the key, Hargreaves' search. The riddle was unfolding, but the danger was growing. She slept lightly, waking to every sound, a creak, a thud, a whisper. Dawn was coming, and with it, more clues. She was ready. Chapter 11. The Village Gossip. The morning light broke through the mist over Blackwood Hall, casting a faint glow across its stone walls. Miss Jane Marple woke early, her eyes opening to the dim chill of her room. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood and damp, and the house creaked softly, as if murmuring its secrets. Her mind was already weaving the clues. She'd gathered the journal's sketch, the scrap of paper, the ledger's note, the heart-shaped key, and the half-finished letter from the study. The heart is safe, but the shadows grow. Trust no one. The stranger in the orchard, Victor Hargreaves' late-night search, and the scratched study lock all pointed to a deadly game. The riddle, the heart of Blackwood lies hidden, where shadows guard the past, was closer now, but its truth stayed, veiled. Today, she'd return to St. Mary Mead, using village gossip to shed light on Blackwood Hall's shadows. She rose, her joints stiff but her movements steady, and dressed in her tweed skirt and cardigan, pinning her brooch neatly. Her handbag was ready, handkerchief, spectacles, notebook, and the 3 notes tucked safely inside. She moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside. The grounds were foggy, the orchard a dark blur. No lantern glowed now, but the stranger's digging lingered in her mind. She let the curtain fall and checked her door locked, as always. The house was quiet, but its pulse thrummed with hidden moves. At breakfast, she announced her plan. "I'll visit St. Mary Mead today," she said, her voice light. "A few errands, and I'll be back by evening." Clara's eyes widened, her napkin twisted tight. "The village, but we need you here." Miss Marple smiled gently. "I won't be long, my dear. Fresh air clears the mind for puzzles." Edward's jaw tightened. "Be careful," he said. "The village talks." Drake laughed, too loud. "Talks. They never shut up. Watch out, Miss Marple." Evelyn smirked, her silk dress rustling. "Gossip's all they've got. Waste of time." Hargreaves' sharp eyes met hers. "The village may know more than we think," he said smoothly. "Safe travels." She nodded, her needles clicking softly. Their reactions told her plenty: Clara's fear, Edward's warning, Hargreaves' interest. She finished her tea and left, a car arranged to take her. The drive was short, the misty lanes of St. Mary Mead soon appearing. The village was waking Mrs. Pauck, sweeping her step, Tommy the baker's boy darting with rolls. Miss Marple stepped out, her handbag on her arm, and walked to the tea shop, where gossip flowed like tea. Mrs. Price was there, with 2 friends, their heads close. "Miss Marple," Mrs. Price called, waving. "Back so soon? What's Blackwood Hall like?" Miss Marple sat, her smile gentle. "Oh, it's grand but old," she said, "full of stories. Have you heard any about it lately?" Mrs. Price leaned forward, her voice low. "Plenty lights at night, cars coming and going." The grocer saw a man in a dark coat near the orchard gate, looked shifty. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes soft. "The stranger, again, a man, you say? Anyone know him?" Mrs. Price's friend, Mrs. Lane, chimed in. "Not local, but the butcher's wife heard he's tied to the Blackwoods. Maybe a cousin, or worse." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind racing. "A cousin, or the stranger digging?" she asked, What about the Blackwoods? Any old tales? Mrs. Price's eyes gleamed. Oh, old Mr. Blackwood was a terror. Fought with everyone as kids, his brother, even the vicar. They say he hid money in that house. Afraid of banks. Double quotes, Mrs. Lane nodded. And his brother, Thomas Blackwood, vanished years ago. Some say he stole from the old man and ran. Others say, worse. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. Thomas Blackwood, a new name, tied to the family's past. Vanished, she said lightly. How curious. The women chattered on, mentioning Clara's wild youth, Edward's temper, and a mysterious woman seen at the Hall's gate young, with a fancy hat. Miss Marple listened, filing every detail. The woman could be Evelyn, or someone else. She thanked them and moved to the post office, where Mrs. Clement was sorting mail. Mrs. Clement said, "What brings you back?" "Blackwood Hall, too spooky." Miss Marple smiled. "Just visiting, my dear. Though the Hall's quite the talk. Any news?" Mrs. Clement leaned close. "My Tom saw a car last night, black, near the Hall, and a man, tall, in a gray coat, looked like he was watching." Miss Marple nodded. "Hargreave, perhaps. Or another player. Watching. That's odd." Mrs. Clement nodded. "And the vicar's wife says Thomas Blackwood's name came up recently, someone asking about him, in the church records." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, but her smile stayed gentle. Thomas again. She thanked Mrs. Clement and walked to the vicarage, where Reverend Thomas and his wife welcomed her. "Jane," the vicar said, "is Blackwood Hall troubling you?" "Not troubling," she said lightly. "Just puzzling. I hear Thomas Blackwood's name's been mentioned." Mrs. Thomas nodded, her face serious. "A man came last week, asking about him. Tall, gray coat, sharp eyes, wanted old records, births, deaths, marriages." Miss Marple's heart quickened. "Hargreave, almost certainly. Did he find anything?" The vicar shook his head. "Not much. Thomas left years ago, after a fight with his brother. Some say he died abroad. Others say he's still out there." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. Thomas Blackwood dead, or hiding. She thanked them and returned to the village, stopping at the grocer's. Mr. Finch was stacking apples. "Miss Marple," he said, "what's new at the Hall?" "It's busy," she said lightly. "You saw a man there, I hear, in a dark coat." He nodded, his voice low. "By the orchard gate, 2 nights back, digging, looked like. Not local, I'd swear." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes gentle. "The stranger, confirmed." She bought a loaf and left, her mind full. Thomas Blackwood, a digging stranger, a woman at the gate, Hargreave's questions. The village had given her threads, and she'd weave them back at the Hall. The car took her back by evening, the Hall looming in the dusk. Dinner was tense, Clara pale, Edward silent, Drake too loud, Evelyn sharp. Hargreave watched, his eyes flicking to Miss Marple. She smiled, her questions small. "The village is full of talk," she said. "They mentioned a Thomas Blackwood, your uncle, perhaps." Clara's fork clattered, and Edward's face darkened. "Uncle Thomas," he said sharply. "He's long gone." Hargreave's lips twitched. "Old gossip," he said smoothly. "Irrelevant." Evelyn smirked. "This family's got more skeletons than the graveyard." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gentle. Their reactions screamed guilt or fear. After dinner, they gathered in the drawing room. Edward spoke of searching the East Wing tomorrow, but Miss Marple's thoughts were on Thomas Blackwood and the study. She'd check it again, using the heart-shaped key. Back in her room, she locked the door, her knitting untouched. The house creaked, footsteps passed, voices murmured. She checked her window locked and sat, her mind racing. The notes, the key, the letter, the stranger, Hargreave, Thomas. The riddle was unfolding, but the danger was growing. She slept lightly, waking to every sound, a creak, a thud, a whisper. Dawn was coming, and with it, more clues. She was ready. Chapter 12. A midnight encounter. The night settled over Blackwood Hall, its heavy silence broken only by the soft creaks of old wood and the distant hoot of an owl. Miss Jane Marple lay awake in her room, her eyes open to the faint moonlight seeping through the curtains. The air was cold, thick with the musty scent of damp stone and aged timbers, and the house felt alive, whispering secrets in its shadows. Her mind was sharp, piecing together the clues she'd gathered: the journal's sketch, the scrap of paper, the ledger's note, the heart-shaped key, the study's letter, and the village gossip about Thomas Blackwood, the stranger digging in the orchard, and Victor Hargreaves' secret visits to the locked study pointed to a deeper scheme. The riddle, the heart of Blackwood lies hidden, where shadows guard the past, was close, but its truth remained hidden. Tonight, she'd return to the study, using the heart-shaped key to uncover more. She rose quietly, her joints stiff but her movements steady, and slipped her coat over her nightdress, pinning her brooch for comfort. Her handbag was ready: handkerchief, spectacles, notebook, and the 3 notes tucked inside. The heart-shaped key was in her pocket, its weight reassuring. She checked her door locked, as always, and listened. The house was still, but she heard a faint creak downstairs, like a footstep on a loose board. Someone was awake. She'd need to be quick. She slipped into the hall, her shoes soft on the stone floor. The portraits watched, their stern eyes glinting in the dim light. She moved toward the east wing, her steps careful, pausing at every sound: a creak, a sigh, a distant thud. The study door loomed ahead, its new lock gleaming faintly. She knelt, her eyes level with the keyhole. The scratches were deeper now, fresh from recent use. She slid the heart-shaped key in her heart steady. It turned with a soft click, and the door opened, revealing the dark study beyond. Inside, moonlight spilled through a tall window, casting shadows across the cluttered desk and towering shelves. The portrait of old Mr. Blackwood glared from above the fireplace, his eyes cold. Miss Marple stepped in, closing the door softly, and moved to the desk. Papers were scattered: ledgers, letters, notes, but one caught her eye, tucked under a book. It was a map, rough but clear, showing Blackwood Hall's grounds. A small X marked the orchard, near the gate she'd found. Her pulse quickened, but she kept her face calm. The stranger's digging, was this their guide? She folded the map and slipped it into her pocket, next to the notes and letter. She scanned the desk, her fingers brushing a drawer. It was locked, but the wood was scratched, as if pried open recently. Hargreave, perhaps. She moved to the shelves, her eyes catching a glint: another key, smaller, hidden behind a book. She took it, her hand steady, and tucked it away. 2 keys now. What did this one open? A noise outside made her freeze: a soft shuffle, like slippers on stone. She stepped behind the curtain, her breath slow, and peered through a gap. The door creaked open, and Clara slipped in, her face pale, a candle in her trembling hand. She moved to the desk, her eyes darting, and rifled through the papers, her movements frantic. Miss Marple watched, her heart quickening. Clara, searching, alone, at midnight. What was she after? Clara paused, pulling a small box from under the desk. She opened it, her hand shaking, and took out a locket, its chain glinting in the candlelight. She clutched it, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "I'm sorry, Father." Then she froze, her head turning toward the curtain. Miss Marple held her breath, but Clara didn't approach. Instead, she tucked the locket into her pocket, replaced the box, and hurried out, closing the door softly. Miss Marple waited, her mind racing. Clara's secret visit, the locket, her tears, what did they mean? She stepped out, checked the desk, and found the box empty now. But its wood was carved with a heart, like her key. She moved to the window, looking toward the orchard. Light flickered tonight, but the map's X burned in her mind. She'd check the orchard tomorrow. At dusk, she slipped out, relocking the study, and returned to her room, her steps silent. The house creaked, a distant door thudded. She locked her door, her knitting untouched, and sat, her mind turning. The map, the new key, Clara's locket, the stranger, Hargreaves' searches. The riddle was unfolding, but the danger was growing. Dawn broke, and Miss Marple dressed, her handbag ready. At breakfast, Clara was pale, her eyes red, avoiding Miss Marple's gaze. Edward was tense, Drake too loud, Evelyn sharp, Hargreave watchful. Miss Marple smiled, her questions light. "The East Wing's so quiet at night," she said, "almost too quiet." Clara's cup clinked, and Hargreave's eyes narrowed. "Quiet's good for thinking," he said smoothly. She nodded, her needles clicking. Clara's nerves, Hargreave's deflection. They knew something. The group planned to search the West Wing parlors, and Miss Marple joined, her eyes on Clara. The search was fruitless. Dusty chairs, old paintings, but Miss Marple watched. Clara was distracted, her hands touching her pocket, where the locket must be. Hargreave stayed close, his sharp eyes missing nothing. At lunch, Miss Marple asked, "The orchard must be lovely, even if wild. Any family treasures hidden there?" Edward's fork paused. "The orchard, it's nothing but trees." Clara's hands shook, and Hargreave's lips twitched. "Old trees hide old secrets," he said. She smiled, her eyes gentle. "The maps, Clara's locket, the stranger's digging." The orchard was key. After lunch, she slipped to the library, checking the poetry book and ledger. Both were untouched, but she felt watched. She returned to the group, her mind on the orchard. Dinner was tense, Evelyn snapping at Clara, Drake drinking too much. Miss Marple smiled, her questions small. "That study must hold such memories," she said. "Lockets, maybe, or maps." Clara's face paled, and Hargreave's eyes sharpened. "Maps," he said, his voice low. She nodded, her smile gentle. Old houses loved their secrets. After dinner, they gathered in the drawing room. Edward spoke of searching the cellars tomorrow, but Miss Marple's thoughts were on the orchard. She'd check it at dusk, using the map. Back in her room, she locked the door, her knitting untouched. The house creaked, footsteps passed, voices murmured. She checked her window locked and sat, her mind racing. The map, the keys, the locket, Clara's tears, the stranger, Hargreave, Thomas Blackwood. The riddle was a web, and she was deep in it. She slept lightly, waking to every sound, a creak, a thud, a whisper. Dawn was coming, and with it, more clues. She was ready. Chapter 13. The Orchard's Secret. The dawn light crept over Blackwood Hall, its pale glow barely cutting through the thick mist that cloaked the grounds. Miss Jane Marple woke early, her eyes opening to the cold gray of her room. The air was heavy with the scent of damp stone and old wood, and the house creaked softly, as if guarding its secrets. Her mind was sharp, weaving together the clues she'd gathered: the journal's sketch, the scrap of paper, the ledger's note, the heart-shaped key, the study's letter, the map with its X in the orchard, and the smaller key found last night. Clara's midnight search for the locket, the stranger digging under the trees, and Victor Hargreave's secret visits to the study all pointed to a deadly game. The riddle, the heart of Blackwood lies hidden, where shadows guard the past, felt tantalizingly close. Today, she'd follow the map to the orchard, where the X marked a secret waiting to be unearthed. She rose quietly, her joints stiff, but her movements steady, and dressed in her tweed skirt and cardigan, pinning her brooch neatly. Her handbag was ready: handkerchief, spectacles, notebook, the 3 notes, the map, and both keys tucked safely inside. She moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside. The grounds were dim, the orchard a dark smudge in the fog. No lantern flickered now, but the stranger's digging lingered in her mind, sharp and urgent. She let the curtain fall and checked her door locked, as always. The house was still, but she felt its pulse, alive with hidden moves. She headed downstairs, her shoes soft on the stone floor. The portraits watched, their stern eyes glinting in the dim light. She paused at the east wing, where the study door stood shut. The scratches on the keyhole were unchanged, but a faint scuff of dirt marked the floor, nearby fresh, like a careless boot. The stranger, or Hargreave. She filed it away and moved on, her eyes catching every detail: cobweb torn, a curtain slightly askew. A candle burned low. In the dining room, breakfast was laid out: bread, jam, tea, but only Clara was there, her face pale, her hands twisting a napkin. "Good morning," Miss Marple, she said, her voice small, her eyes avoiding hers. Morning, my dear, Miss Marple replied, her smile gentle. A quiet start today, isn't it? Clara nodded, her fingers tightening. Too quiet. Miss Marple sat, pouring tea, her mind on the orchard. The grounds must be lovely in this mist, she said lightly. The orchard, especially. Your father ever spend time there? Clara's hand stilled, her face paling. No, he hated it, said it reminded him of bad things. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes soft but sharp. Bad things. The map's X. The strangers digging Clara's locket. The orchard was key. Edward entered, his face drawn, his coffee untouched. Morning, Miss Marple, he said, sitting quickly. Drake bustled in next, his red face too cheerful, followed by Evelyn, her silk dress rustling, her eyes cold. Hargreave was last, his gray coat neat, his sharp gaze sweeping the room. Miss Marple smiled, noting his watchfulness. He sat, his movements precise, like a man holding a secret. Breakfast was tense, the clink of cups loud in the silence. Miss Marple asked small questions. The orchard's so wild, she said. Ever find anything there? Old treasures, maybe. Edward's jaw tightened. Nothing but weeds, he said sharply. Hargreave's lips twitched. Wild places hide wild things, he said smoothly. Evelyn snorted. It's a wasteland. Like this house. Drake laughed, too loud. Wastelands have gold. Miss Marple. She smiled, her needles clicking softly. Sometimes, Mr. Drake. If you know where to dig. Clara's cup clinked, and Hargreave's eyes narrowed. Miss Marple watched them, all Clara's nerves, Edward's tension, Drake's false cheer, Evelyn's cold distance, Hargreave's sharp gaze. The map in her pocket felt heavy, its X burning in her mind. Breakfast ended, and Edward stood. We'll search the cellars today. Miss Marple, join us. Of course, she said, but her mind was on the orchard. She'd slip away at dusk, when the light was soft and the others were busy. The group moved to the cellars, a dark maze of stone and dust. They searched crates, barrels, old bottles, but found nothing. Miss Marple watched, her knitting in her hands. Drake was sloppy, Evelyn bored, Clara distracted, Edward tense. Hargreave was thorough, his eyes flicking to her. She smiled, her face calm, but she noted his interest. He knew she was close to something. At noon, she excused herself, saying she needed air. Instead, she slipped to the library, checking the poetry book, ledger, and journal. All were untouched, but she felt watched. She moved to the east wing, pausing at the study door. No sound, but the scuff of dirt was gone, swept away. Someone was covering tracks. She returned to the group for lunch, the dining room heavy with tension. Clara was pale, Edward silent, Drake too loud, Evelyn sharp. Hargreave watched, his eyes on Miss Marple. She smiled, her questions light. The orchard must hold memories, she said. Your mother loved it, I hear. Clara's fork clattered, her face white. Mother, yes she did. Edward shot her a look, and Hargreave's lips twitched. Miss Marple nodded, filing it away. The orchard was personal, tied to the family's past. Lunch ended, and the group returned to the drawing room. Edward spoke of searching the west wing tomorrow, but Miss Marple's thoughts were on the map. She'd follow it at dusk. In the afternoon, she slipped to the garden, her handbag light. The air was damp, the ground soft. She paused at the orchard gate, its lock still scratched. A new heel print joined the others, fresher, deeper. The stranger was still coming. She didn't enter, saving it for dusk, and returned to the house, her mind on the map's X. Dinner was tense, Evelyn snapping at Clara, Drake drinking too much. Miss Marple smiled, her questions small. The orchard's so quiet, she said, almost like it's hiding something. Clara's hands shook, and Edward's jaw tightened. Hargreave's eyes sharpened. Quiet places often do, he said. She nodded, her eyes gentle. He was testing her, but she'd test him back. After dinner, they gathered in the drawing room. Edward spoke of the cellar search, but Miss Marple's thoughts were on the orchard. She excused herself early, saying she was tired. Back in her room, she locked the door, her knitting untouched. She waited until the house quieted, then slipped downstairs, her coat on, the map and keys in her pocket. The garden was dark, the mist thick. She moved to the orchard gate, its lock creaking open with a push. The trees loomed, their branches gnawed. She unfolded the map, her eyes tracing the X. It marked a spot near an old oak, its trunk wide and scarred. She moved carefully, her shoes sinking into soft earth. The ground was disturbed, fresh dirt piled near the oak. The stranger had been here, digging. She knelt, her fingers brushing the soil. Something hard caught her touch, a small box, metal, buried shallowly. She pulled it out, her heart quickening. It was locked, but the smaller key from the study fit perfectly. She opened it, revealing a folded paper and a ring, its stone glinting in the moonlight. The paper was old, its handwriting old Mr. Blackwood's. It read, "The heart is here, where love was lost. Forgive me, Thomas." Her lips pursed. Thomas Blackwood. The ring, the note, the orchard tied to the family's past. She slipped the paper and ring into her pocket, replacing the box in the earth. A noise made her freeze, a twig snapping. She stood, stepping into the oak's shadow. A figure emerged, tall, in a dark coat. The stranger. He held a lantern, its light swinging. He moved to the oak, kneeling where she'd been, and cursed softly, finding the box empty. Miss Marple watched, her breath slow. He stood, his face shadowed, and scanned the darkness. She stayed still, hidden. He turned, the lantern bobbing, and vanished into the trees. She waited, then slipped back to the gate, her heart steady. The stranger was real, and he was hunting the same prize. Back in her room, she locked the door, her mind racing. The note, the ring, Thomas Blackwood, the stranger, Clara's locket, Hargreaves' searches. The riddle was unfolding, but the danger was closing in. She slept lightly, waking to every sound, a creak, a thud, a whisper. Dawn was coming, and with it, more clues. She was ready. Chapter 14. The past resurfaces. Dawn light seeped through the heavy curtains of Blackwood Hall, casting a faint glow across Miss Jane Marple's room. She woke early, her eyes opening to the cold stillness, the air thick with the scent of damp stone and old wood. The house creaked softly, as if reluctant to reveal its secrets. Her mind was already sharp, weaving the clues she'd gathered: the journal sketch, the scrap of paper, the ledger's note, the heart-shaped key, the study's letter, the orchard map, and now the metal box's contents. A ring and a note in old Mr. Blackwood's hand. "The heart is here, where love was lost. Forgive me, Thomas." The stranger digging in the orchard, Clara's midnight locket, Victor Hargreaves' secret study visits, and the village gossip about Thomas Blackwood all pointed to a tangled past. The riddle, the heart of Blackwood lies hidden, where shadows guard the past, was nearly in focus, but its final truth lay buried in the family's history. Today, she'd probe deeper, using the new note to stir the players. She rose quietly, her joints stiff but her movements steady, and dressed in her tweed skirt and cardigan, pinning her brooch neatly. Her handbag was ready: handkerchief, spectacles, notebook, the 4 notes, the map, the ring, and both keys tucked safely inside. She moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside. The grounds were misty, the orchard a dark blur. No lantern glowed now, but the stranger's shadowed face lingered. In her mind, who was he, and why was he hunting the same prize? She let the curtain fall and checked her door locked, as always. The house was still, but its pulse thrummed with hidden moves. She headed downstairs, her shoes soft on the stone floor. The portraits watched, their stern eyes glinting. She paused at the east wing, where the study door stood shut. The scratches on the keyhole were unchanged, but a faint smudge of dirt marked the floor nearby, fresher than yesterday. Someone was still moving, careless or rushed. She filed it away and moved to the dining room, where breakfast was laid out: bread, eggs, tea, but only Edward was there, his face drawn, his coffee untouched. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low. "Sleep well?" "Well enough," she replied, her smile gentle. This house keeps one thinking, doesn't it? He nodded, his eyes flicking to the door. Too much thinking. Miss Marple sat, pouring tea, her mind on the orchard note. The past has a way of stirring here, she said lightly. Your uncle, Thomas Whodunit, stories about him. Edward's cup clinked against its saucer, his face tightening. Thomas, he's ancient history. Left years ago. She nodded, her eyes soft but sharp. His quick dismissal screamed importance. Clara entered, her face pale, her hands twisting. A napkin, her eyes avoiding Miss Marple's. Good morning, she mumbled, sitting quickly. Drake bustled in next, his red face too cheerful, followed by Evelyn, her silk dress rustling, her eyes cold. Hargreave was last, his gray coat neat, his sharp gaze sweeping the room. Miss Marple smiled, noting his watchfulness. He sat, his movements precise, like a man guarding a plan. Breakfast was tense, the clink of cups loud in the silence. Miss Marple asked small questions. Thomas Blackwood's name keeps coming up, she said. The village says he vanished after a fight with your father. Curious, isn't it? Clara's hands stilled, her face white. He was gone before I was born. Hargreave's lips twitched. Old gossip, he said smoothly. Irrelevant to the riddle. Evelyn snorted. This family's past is a cesspool. Why dig it up? Drake laughed, too loud. Digging's your game, Miss Marple. Find any gold yet? She smiled, her needles clicking softly. Not gold, Mr. Drake, but stories have value. Edward's jaw tightened, and Clara's eyes darted to the door. Miss Marple watched them out. Fear, Edward's tension, Drake's false cheer, Evelyn's cold distance, Hargreave's sharp gaze. The ring and note in her pocket felt heavy. Thomas Blackwood's name heavier still. Breakfast ended, and Edward stood. We'll search the East Wing parlors today. Miss Marple, join us. Of course, she said, but her mind was on the orchard and Thomas. She'd push them later, at dinner, when nerves were raw. The group moved to the East Wing, searching dusty parlors, bookshelves, cabinets, under rugs, but found nothing. Miss Marple watched, her knitting in her hands. Drake was sloppy, Evelyn bored, Clara distracted, Edward tense. Hargreave was thorough, his eyes flicking to her. She smiled, her face calm, but she noted his interest. He suspected she knew something. Noon, she excused herself, saying she needed rest. Instead, she slipped to the library, checking the poetry book, ledger, and journal. All were untouched, but a faint creak came from the hall. She paused, listening. Footsteps, soft and quick, faded away. Hargreave, or the stranger. She moved to the study door, its scratches unchanged. No sound inside, but the smudge of dirt was gone, swept clean. Someone was covering tracks. She returned to the group for lunch, the dining room heavy with tension. Clara was pale, Edward silent, Drake too loud, Evelyn sharp. Hargreave watched, his eyes on Miss Marple. She smiled, her questions light. The orchard's such a quiet place, she said. Your mother loved it, didn't she? Maybe Thomas did too. Clara's fork clattered, her face white. Mother, yes, but Thomas was gone. Edward shot her a look, and Hargreave's lips twitched. Old family tales, he said. They muddied the riddle. She nodded, filing it away. The orchard, Thomas, the ring, Clara's locket, they were tied to the family's heart. Lunch ended, and the group returned to the drawing room. Edward spoke of searching the cellars tomorrow, but Miss Marple's thoughts were on Thomas Blackwood. She'd stir the pot at dinner, watching their faces. In the afternoon, she slipped to the garden, her handbag light. The air was damp, the ground soft. She paused at the orchard gate, its lock scratched, a new heel print, deeper than before. The stranger was still coming, still digging. She didn't enter, saving it for later, and returned to the house, her mind on the ring's note. Forgive me, Thomas. Dinner was tense, Evelyn snapping at Clara, Drake drinking too much. Miss Marple smiled, her questions small but sharp. Thomas Blackwood sounds like a mystery, she said. The village says he fought with your father over love. A ring, maybe, or a promise broken. Clara's glass tipped, wine spilling. "Love," she whispered, her face white. Edward's jaw tightened. "That's nonsense." Thomas stole from father and ran. Hargreaves' eyes sharpened. "Village lies," he said smoothly. "Focus on the riddle." Evelyn smirked. "Love, theft, lies. This family's got it all." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gentle. Clara's spill, Edward's anger, Hargreaves' deflection, they were unraveling. She watched Clara's hand touch her pocket, where the locket must be. After dinner, they gathered in the drawing room. Edward spoke of the cellar search, but Miss Marple's thoughts were on Thomas. She excused herself early, saying she was tired. Back in her room, she locked the door, her knitting untouched. She sat, her mind racing, and pulled out the ring. It was gold, with a small ruby, worn but heavy with meaning. The note said love was lost. Thomas and old Mr. Blackwood brothers, rivals, bound by betrayal. She tucked the ring away, checking the window locked. The house creaked. Footsteps passed. Voices murmured. A soft knock startled her. She paused, listening. Miss Marple, Clara's voice, small and trembling. She opened the door, her smile gentle. Clara stood there, her face pale, the locket in her hand. I need to tell you something," she whispered. "About Thomas." Miss Marple nodded, stepping aside. "Come in, my dear." Clara sat, her hand shaking. Thomas was mother's love, not father's. They fought, and Thomas left. "This locket's hers, with his picture. Father hid it, but I found it." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. "And the ring?" she asked softly. Clara's eyes widened. "Ring? I don't know." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gentle. Clara was telling the truth, but only part. "Thank you, my dear. Be careful who you trust." Clara nodded, tears in her eyes, and left. Miss Marple locked the door, her mind racing. Thomas, the mother, the ring, the locket. The riddle's heart was the family's betrayal. The stranger, could he be Thomas, returned with someone tied to him? She slept lightly, waking to every sound, a creak, a thud, a whisper. Dawn was coming, and with it, more clues. She was ready. Chapter 15. The stranger's identity. The dawn light crept over Blackwood Hall, its pale rays barely piercing the dense mist that shrouded the estate. Miss Jane Marple woke early, her eyes opening to the cold gray of her room. The air was thick, with the scent of damp stone and old wood, and the house creaked softly, as if whispering its buried truths. Her mind was sharp, weaving the clues. She'd gathered the journal's sketch, the scrap of paper, the ledger's note, the heart-shaped key, the study's letter, the orchard map, the ring and its note, and Clara's tearful confession about the locket, and Thomas Blackwood's love for their mother, the stranger digging in the orchard, Victor Hargreaves' secret study visits, and the village gossip about Thomas's disappearance. All pointed to a family fractured by betrayal. The riddle, the heart of Blackwood, lies hidden, where shadows guard the past, was nearly clear, its answer tied to Thomas. Today, she'd confront the stranger's identity, using the orchard's clues to force the truth into the open. She rose quietly, her joints stiff, but her movements steady, and dressed in her tweed skirt and cardigan, pinning her brooch neatly. Her handbag was ready, handkerchief, spectacles, notebook, the 4 notes, the map, the ring, and both keys tucked safely inside. She moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside. The grounds were dim, the orchard a dark smudge in the fog. No lantern glowed now, but the stranger's shadowed figure, cursing over the empty box, lingered in her mind. Was he Thomas, returned after years, or someone tied to his past? She let the curtain fall and checked her door locked, as always. The house was still, but its pulse thrummed with hidden moves. She headed downstairs, her shoes soft on the stone floor. The portraits watched, their stern eyes glinting. She paused at the east wing, where the study door stood shut. The scratches on the keyhole were unchanged, but a faint scuff of dirt marked the floor. Fresher than yesterday, someone was still moving, careless or rushed. She moved to the dining room, where breakfast was laid out: bread, jam, tie, but only Clara was there. Her face pale, her hands twisting a napkin, her eyes red from last night's tears. Good morning, my dear, Miss Marple said, her smile gentle. A quiet morning, isn't it? Clara nodded, her voice small. Too quiet. I shouldn't have said anything last night. Miss Marple sat, pouring tea, her mind on Clara's confession. You were brave, she said softly. Truth helps, even when it hurts. Your mother's locket, did Thomas give it to her? Clara's hands stilled, her eyes wide. I think so. Father hated it. He hid it after she died. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes soft but sharp. The locket, the ring, Thomas's love. It fit the note. The heart is here, where love was lost. Edward entered, his face drawn, his coffee untouched. Morning, Miss Marple, he said, his voice low. Drake bustled in next, his red face too cheerful, followed by Evelyn, her silk dress rustling, her eyes cold. Hargreave was last, his gray coat neat, his sharp gaze sweeping the room. Miss Marple smiled, noting his watchfulness. He sat, his movements precise, like a man holding a secret. Breakfast was tense, the clink of cups loud in the silence. Mr. Marple asked small questions. The orchard's such a mystery, she said lightly. The village says Thomas Blackwood loved it, like your mother. Strange, isn't it? Clara's cup clinked, her face white. Edward's jaw tightened. Thomas is gone, he said sharply. Village lies. Hargreave's lips twitched. Gossips, a distraction, he said smoothly. The riddles in the house. Evelyn snorted. The riddles, a joke. This family's cursed. Drake laughed. Too loud. Curses and treasures, eh? Miss Marple, she smiled, her needles clicking softly. Curses are just stories, Mr. Drake, but stories hide truths. Clara's hand shook, and Hargreave's eyes narrowed. Miss Marple watched him, out, fear, Edward's anger, Drake's false cheer, Evelyn's cold distance, Hargreave's sharp gaze. The ring and note in her pocket felt heavy, Thomas Blackwood's name heavier still. Breakfast ended, and Edward stood. We'll search the West Wing cellars today. Miss Marple, join us. Of course, she said, but her mind was on the orchard. She'd return at dusk, hoping to catch the stranger. The group moved to the cellars, a dark maze of stone and dust. They searched crates, barrels, old bottles but found nothing. Miss Marple watched, her knitting in her hands. Drake was sloppy, Evelyn bored, Clara distracted, Edward tense. Hargreave was thorough, his eyes flicking to her. She smiled, her face calm, but she noted his interest. He knew she was close out at noon. She excused herself, saying she needed air. Instead, she slipped to the library, checking the poetry book, ledger, and journal. All were untouched, but a faint creak came from the hall. She paused, listening. Footsteps, soft and quick, faded away. She moved to the study door. Its scratches unchanged. No sound inside, but the scuff of dirt was gone, swept clean. Someone was covering tracks. She returned to the group for lunch, the dining room heavy with tension. Clara was pale, Edward silent, Drake too loud, Evelyn sharp. Hargreave watched, his eyes on Miss Marple. She smiled, her questions light. The orchard's so quiet, she said. The village says a man's been seen there, digging at night. Curious, isn't it? Clara's fork clattered, her face white. Edward's eyes narrowed. Digging. Nonsense. Hargreave's lips twitched. Villagers see ghosts everywhere, he said smoothly. She nodded, filing it away. Their reactions screamed guilt or fear. Lunch ended, and the group returned to the drawing room. Edward spoke of searching the East Wing tomorrow, but Miss Marple's thoughts were on the stranger. She'd confront him tonight, using the maps. In the afternoon, she slipped to the garden, her handbag light. The air was damp, the ground soft. She paused at the orchard gate, its lock scratched, a new heel print, deeper than before. The stranger was still coming. She didn't enter, saving it for dusk, and returned to the house, her mind on the ring's note. Forgive me, Thomas. Dinner was tense, Evelyn snapping at Clara, Drake drinking too much. Miss Marple smiled, her questions sharp. Thomas Blackwood's story is sad, she said. The village says he loved your mother, Clara. A ring, a locket, such tokens of love. Clara's glass tipped, water spilling. I don't know. Edward's jaw tightened. Enough, Miss Marple. Thomas is dead. Hargreaves' eyes sharpened. Old wounds don't help the riddle, he said. Evelyn smirked. Wounds. This family's bleeding. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gentle. Clara's spill, Edward's anger, Hargreaves' deflection. They were unraveling. She watched Clara's hand touch her pocket, the locket's hiding place. After dinner, they gathered in the drawing room. Edward spoke of the cellar's search, but Miss Marple's thoughts were on the orchard. She excused herself early, saying she was tired back in her room. She locked the door, her knitting untouched. She waited until midnight, then slipped downstairs, her coat on the map, ring and keys in her pocket. The garden was dark, the mist thick. She moved to the orchard gate, its lock creaking open. The trees loomed, their branches gnawed. She followed the map to the scarred oak, its ground still disturbed. A faint glow caught her Aja lantern, moving between the trees. She stepped into the oak's shadow, her breath slow. The stranger emerged, tall, in a dark coat, his face shadowed. He knelt at the oak, digging with a small spade. Miss Marple watched, her heart steady. He stopped, pulling out a small cloth bag, and opened it, revealing paper's letters, yellowed but intact. He scanned them, his hands shaking, and muttered, "Thomas, you fool." Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. "Good evening, looking for something?" The stranger froze, the lantern swinging toward her. His face was weathered, his eyes sharp, lined with years. "Who are you?" he growled, his voice low. "Jane Marple," she said, her smile gentle. "And you?" "Thomas Blackwood, perhaps." His eyes widened, his hand tightening on the bag. "Thomas is dead," he said, but his voice wavered. She nodded, her eyes soft but sharp. "Dead, or hiding. The ring says otherwise." She held up the ruby ring, its stone glinting. He lunged, but she stepped back, her hand raised. "I mean, no harm," she said. "But Clara and Edward deserve the truth. So does your brother's memory." He stopped, his face twisting. "My brother, he ruined me. Took her, hid the truth. These letters." He shook the bag. "Prove it. I'm not Thomas. I'm his son, James." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. "James, Thomas's son." The pieces fit the locket, the ring, the note, the digging, and the heart of Blackwood. She asked softly. He laughed, bitter. "A lie. My father's inheritance, stolen by his brother. I want what's mine." She nodded, her eyes gentle. "Then come inside. Face them. Lies only grow in the dark." He hesitated, his eyes searching hers. A noise in the trees made him turn, footsteps, quick and heavy. Hargreave emerged, a lantern in one hand, a pistol in the other. "Enough," he said, his voice cold. "Drop the bag, James." Miss Marple's pulse raced, but she stayed still. "Mr. Hargreave," she said calmly. "A pistol? That's hardly fair." Hargreave's eyes narrowed. "Stay out of this, Miss Marple. This is family business." James clutched the bag, his face pale. "You knew," he spat. "You've been hunting me." Hargreave smirked. "Your father's mistake was trusting me. Now, the bag." Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice firm. "Put the pistol down, Mr. Hargreave. The truth's coming out, with or without you." Hargreave hesitated, his eyes flicking between them. A shout came from the house, Edward's voice, calling. Hargreave cursed, lowering the pistol, and vanished into the trees. James stood frozen, the bag in his hands. Miss Marple touched his arm. "Come with me," she said softly. "It's time." She led him to the house, her heart steady. The drawing room was lit. Edward, Clara, Drake, and Evelyn gathered, their faces tense. Clara gasped, seeing James. Miss Marple smiled, her voice calm. "This is James, Thomas Blackwood's son. He's here for the truth." The room erupted. Deadwood's anger, Clara's tears, Drake's confusion, Evelyn's scorn. Miss Marple watched, her knitting in her hands, her mind clear. The riddle was solved. The heart of Blackwood laid bare, a family torn by love and lies. But the danger wasn't over. Hargreave was still out there, and the letters held more secrets. She slept lightly, waking to every sound: a creak, a thud, a whisper. Dawn was coming, and with it, the final truths. She was ready. Chapter 16. The final revelation. The dawn broke over Blackwood Hall, its pale light cutting through the thinning mist that clung to the estate. Miss Jane Marple woke early, her eyes opening to the cold gray of her room. The air was heavy with the scent of damp stone and old wood, and the house creaked softly, as if exhaling its long-held secrets. Her mind was sharp, piecing together the final threads of the mystery: the journal's sketch, the scrap of paper, the ledger's note, the heart-shaped key, the study's letter, the orchard map, the ring and its note, Clara's locket, and James, Thomas Blackwood's son, revealed last night in the orchard. Victor Hargreaves' armed intervention, his pistol glinting in the lantern light, confirmed his role as more than a lawyer. The riddle, the heart of Blackwood, lies hidden, where shadows guard the past, was solved. The heart was the family's betrayal, centered on Thomas's lost love and stolen inheritance. Today, Miss Marple would gather the players, expose Hargreaves' scheme, and lay the truth bare. She rose quietly, her joints stiff but her movements steady, and dressed in her tweed skirt and cardigan, pinning her brooch neatly. Her handbag was ready: handkerchief, spectacles, notebook, the 4 notes, the map, the ring, the 2 keys, and James's letters tucked safely inside. She moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside. The grounds were clearer now, the orchard visible in the soft light. No lantern glowed, but the memory of James's bitter words and Hargreaves' cold threat lingered. She let the curtain fall and checked her door locked. As always, the house was still, but its pulse thrummed with the weight of truth. She headed downstairs, her shoes soft on the stone floor. The portraits watched, their stern eyes softer now, as if relieved. She paused at the east wing, where the study door stood shut. The scratches on the keyhole were unchanged, but a faint smudge of dirt marked the floor, fresher than yesterday. Hargreave, perhaps, or someone covering tracks. She moved to the dining room, where breakfast was laid out: bread, eggs, tyboot. Only Clara was there, her face pale, her hands trembling, her eyes red from last night's shock. "Good morning, my dear," Miss Marple said, her smile gentle. "A heavy night, wasn't it?" Clara nodded, her voice small. "James, is he really Thomas's son?" Miss Marple sat, pouring tea. "He is," she said softly. "And he's here for what's his, but there's more to tell." Clara's eyes widened, but before she could speak, Edward entered, his face drawn, his coffee untouched. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low. "What's this about, James?" Miss Marple smiled gently. "We'll talk soon, Mr. Blackwood, all of us." Drake bustled in next, his red face less cheerful, his eyes wary. Evelyn followed, her silk dress rustling, her eyes cold but curious. Hargreave was last, his gray coat neat, his sharp gaze sweeping the room. Miss Marple noted his calm, too polished, like a man bracing for a storm. He sat, his movements precise, but his hand lingered near his pocket where the pistol might be. Breakfast was tense, the clink of cups loud in the silence. Miss Marple asked small questions. "Last night was quite the revelation," she said lightly. "James's story ties to your father, doesn't it? A love lost, a brother betrayed." Clara's hand stilled, her face white. Edward's jaw tightened. "Thomas got what he deserved," he said sharply. Hargreaves' lips twitched. "Family squabbles," he said smoothly. "They don't solve the riddle." Evelyn snorted. "The riddle's done. This is just a mess." Drake laughed, weaker now. "Messes have payoffs, eh, Miss Marple?" She smiled, her needles clicking softly. "Payoffs come with truth, Mr. Drake, and we're close." Hargreaves' eyes narrowed, and Clara's hands shook. Miss Marple watched them out: Clara's fear, Edward's anger, Drake's unease, Evelyn's cold distance, Hargreaves' sharp control. The letters in her pocket felt heavy, their secrets ready to spill. Breakfast ended, and Miss Marple stood. "I'd like us to meet in the drawing room after breakfast," she said. James will join us. It's time to finish this. Edward's face darkened, but he nodded. Clara gasped, and Hargreaves' lips tightened. Miss Marple moved to the drawing room, her step steady, and sent a maid to fetch James, who'd been given a room in the west wing. He arrived, his face weathered, his dark coat dusty, the cloth bag of letters in his hand. He nodded to her, his eyes hard but grateful. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For last night." She smiled gently. "The truth helps us all, James." The others gathered, their faces tense. Clara sat near Edward, her hands clutching her locket. Drake lounged, his smile forced. Evelyn leaned by the window, her eyes sharp. Hargreaves stood by the fireplace, his hand near his pocket. Miss Marple sat, her knitting in her lap, her eyes gentle but piercing. "Let's begin," she said calmly. "The riddle's heart is your family's past. Thomas Blackwood loved your mother, Clara, but your father took her, and Thomas was cast out. This ring," she held it up, "it's ruby glinting, was his promise to her. Your father hid it, along with this note." She unfolded the orchard note. "The heart is here, where love was lost. Forgive me, Thomas." Clara's eyes filled with tears, and Edward's jaw clenched. James gripped his bag, his face tight. Miss Marple continued, "James is Thomas's son, born abroad after Thomas fled. These letters," she gestured to the bag, "prove your father's theft of Thomas's inheritance. But someone else knew." She turned to Hargreave, her voice soft but firm. "You, Mr. Hargreave, you weren't just a lawyer. You worked for old Mr. Blackwood, hunting Thomas, ensuring his silence. When James returned, you saw a chance to control the inheritance." Hargreaves' face stayed blank, but his hand twitched. "Nonsense," he said coldly. "I'm here for fairness." Miss Marple smiled. "Fairness?" "You searched the study, threatened James with a pistol, and covered track-dirt smudges, scratched locks. You wanted the letters to blackmail the family or claim the prize." Clara gasped, and Edward stood, his face red. "A pistol? Is this true?" Hargreaves' eyes narrowed. "She's an old woman spinning tales." Miss Marple pulled out the study letter. "The heart is safe, but the shadows grow. Trust no one. Your father wrote this," she said. "He feared you, Mr. Hargreave. You betrayed his trust, just as he betrayed Thomas." James stepped forward, his voice low. "I saw him last night, pistol in hand. He'd have killed me for these." He opened the bag, spilling letters onto the table, letters detailing old Mr. Blackwood's theft, Thomas's exile, and Hargreaves' role as enforcer. Evelyn laughed, sharp. "Well, that's a twist. You're a snake, Hargreave." Drake's face paled. This is too much." Clara sobbed, clutching her locket. Edward stared at the letters, his face ashen. "Father did this." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gentle. "He did. But the heart of Blackwood isn't gold or land. It's truth. James deserves his share. And you, Clara, Edward, deserve peace." Hargreave moved, his hand diving for his pocket. James lunged, pinning his arm. The pistol clattered to the floor, and Edward grabbed it, his face grimmed. "Enough," he said. "You're done." Hargreave snarled, but his shoulders slumped. Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking. "The police will handle him," she said calmly, "and the will can be settled fairly now." Clara stood, her face wet, and hugged. "James, I'm sorry," she whispered. "For everything." James nodded, his eyes soft. Edward sighed, his anger fading. "We'll make it right," he said. Miss Marple gathered her things, her work done. The drawing room felt lighter, the shadows lifting. She returned to her room, packing for St. Mary Mead. The house creaked, but it was quieter now, its secrets laid bare. She slept soundly, waking to a clear dawn. The car took her home, the village's sunny lanes welcoming her. The riddle was solved, the heart of Blackwood found. She was ready for her next puzzle. Chapter 17. The Hidden Passage. The autumn light filtered through the tall windows of Blackwood Hall, casting long shadows across its stone floors. Miss Jane Marple had returned to St. Mary Mead after solving the riddle of the Blackwood family's past. But a letter from Clara Blackwood, received just yesterday, had drawn her back. Clara's words were urgent, strange noises in the walls, papers missing from the study, and a sense that the house still held secrets. The truth about Thomas Blackwood's betrayal and his son James's return had brought peace, but now unease stirred again. Miss Marple sat in the drawing room, her knitting needles clicking softly, her eyes sharp despite her gentle smile. The riddle was gone, but Blackwood Hall, it seemed, was not done with mysteries. She had arrived that morning, welcomed by Clara, whose pale face and trembling hands told of sleepless nights. Edward was there too, his jaw tight, less angry now but wary. James, newly accepted as a Blackwood, lingered at the edges, his weathered face guarded. Drake and Evelyn had left, their roles in the Wills game over, but Victor Hargreaves' shadow hung heavy, though he was in custody, awaiting trial for his schemes. The house felt quieter, but its creaks and sighs whispered of something hidden. Miss Marple's mind was already turning, piecing together Clara's tale of thuds in the night and a cold draft where none should be. She rose, her joints stiff but her movements steady, and dressed in her tweed skirt and cardigan, pinning her brooch neatly. Her handbag was ready, handkerchief, spectacles, notebook, and the old notes from the riddle tucked inside for reference. Clara had shown her to the study, where the noises were loudest, and Miss Marple stood now by the desk, her eyes scanning the room. The portrait of old Mr. Blackwood still glared from the fireplace, but the shelves were tidier, the papers sorted after Hargreaves' rifling. Yet Clara had said a letter ode in her father's hand was gone, taken from a locked drawer. Miss Marple, Clara said, her voice small, it's like the house is alive. The noises come from behind that wall. She pointed to the bookshelf. It's dark wood, heavy with dust. But Miss Marple nodded, her smile gentle. Houses like this have secrets, my dear. Let's see what this one's hiding. She stepped closer, her fingers trailing the shelves. A faint draft brushed her hand, cold and sharp, from behind a row of books. She tapped the wood, listening. A hollow sound answered, faint but clear. Her lips pursed. A hidden passage, perhaps. Old manners often had them escape routes, smuggling nooks, or worse. She turned to Clara. Have you moved these books lately? Clara shook her head. No, but James was here yesterday, looking through Father's things. He said he wanted to understand him. Miss Marple filed it away. James, curious and searching. She asked, and Edward, has he been in here? Clara hesitated, her hands twisting. He checks the study often. Says he's protecting Father's legacy. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes soft but sharp. Edward, protective or possessive? She moved to the desk, noting a scratch on the locked drawer, fresh and deep, as if pried open. The missing letter, Clara said, mentioned a second heart in the house, another secret, left by old Mr. Blackwood. The riddle was solved, but this hinted at more. Let's look tonight, Miss Marple said. When the house is quiet, noises are clearer then. Clara nodded, her eyes wide. Miss Marple left the study, walking the halls, her shoes hushed on the stone. The portraits watched, their stern eyes softer now, but the house felt heavy, its secret stirring. She paused at the east wing, where the study's wall met the outer corridor. A faint scuff of dirt marked the floor, like a boot's careless brush. Someone was moving, and not just Clara or Edward, James, or another player, drawn by the hall's wealth. At lunch, the dining room was tense. Clara was pale, Edward silent, James worried. Miss Marple smiled, her questions light. This house is full of surprises, she said. Ever hear of hidden passages? Old places like this, love them. Edward's fork paused. Passages? Father never mentioned any. James's eyes flicked to Clara, then away. Old houses hide things, he said quietly. My father Thomas said, this place was a maze. Clara's hands shook. A maze, that's frightening. Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking. Their reactions told her plenty. Edward's quick denial, James's hint, Clara's fear. She watched James's hands, rough from years abroad, touching his pocket, as if checking something. A key, perhaps. Lunch ended, and Edward stood. We're sorting the attic today, Miss Marple. Care to join? Of course, she said, but her mind was on the passage. She'd check the study wall tonight, when the house slept, the attic. Search was dusty trunks, old clothes, faded papers, but fruitless. Miss Marple watched, her knitting in her hands. Edward was thorough, Clara distracted, James quiet. No one mentioned the noises, but their eyes darted to the walls. At dusk, Miss Marple slipped to the library, where the old journal and poetry books still sat. Both were untouched, but a new detail caught her Aja book out of place, its dust smudged, as if recently moved. She pulled it out, finding a folded paper inside. Its handwriting old Mr. Blackwood's. It read, "The second heart lies where walls breathe." Her pulse quickened, but her face stayed calm. Another clue, tied to the missing letter. She slipped the paper into her pocket and returned the book, memorizing its place. Dinner was tense, Clara barely eating, Edward staring at his plate, James gripping his glass. Miss Marple smiled, her question small. "The study's so quiet," she said. "But walls can hide things. Passages, maybe, or secrets." Edward's jaw tightened. This house has no more secrets. James's eyes narrowed. "Every old place has 'em. My father said the walls here spoke." Clara shivered. Miss Marple nodded, filing it away. James's hint, Edward's denial. The passage was real, and they knew more than they said. After dinner, they gathered in the drawing room, but Miss Marple excused herself, saying she was tired. Back in her room, she locked the door, her knitting untouched. She waited until midnight, then slipped downstairs, her coat over her nightdress, the new note in her pocket. The study was dark, moonlight spilling through the window. She moved to the bookshelf, her fingers brushing the wood. The draft was stronger, now, cold against her skin. She pushed a book aside, feeling for a catch. A soft click answered, and the shelf creaked, swinging inward to reveal a narrow passage, its stone walls damp and cold. Her heart quickened, but she stayed calm. She stepped inside, her shoes silent, and followed the passage, its air heavy with dust. It led downward, twisting to a small chamber, lit faintly by a crack in the outer wall. A wooden chest sat in the corner, its lock old but scratched, as if recently opened. She knelt, her fingers brushing the wood. Footsteps behind her made her freeze a soft shuffle, like boots on stone. She turned, stepping into the shadows, her breath slowed. James emerged, a lantern in his hand, his face tense. He moved to the chest, pulling a key from his pocket, small, like the one Miss Marple had found in the study. He opened the chest, revealing papers and a small box. He lifted the box, his hand shaking, and opened it, revealing a gold locket, twin to Clara's, with a faded picture inside. "Mother," he whispered, his voice breaking. Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice soft. "Good evening, James," looking for the second heart. He froze, the lantern swinging. "Miss Marple, I didn't mean to hide it. This was my father's. For her, I needed to know." She nodded, her eyes gentle. "Know what, my dear?" "That your father's love was real." He nodded, his eyes wet. "Edward, he found the passage first. Took a letter, said it was to protect Clara, but I think he's hiding something." Miss Marple's lips pursed. Edward searching and hiding. She moved to the chest, glancing at the paper's letters. Deeds, a will naming Thomas as equal heir. The second heart, Thomas's stolen legacy. A noise above made them both freeze, footsteps, heavy and quick. Edward appeared, his face pale, a lantern in his hand. "James," he said, his voice low, "you shouldn't be here." Miss Marple stepped forward, her smile gentle. "Nor should you, Mr. Blackwood. Hiding letters, are we?" Edward's eyes widened. I was protecting Clara. Father's willet, name's Thomas. It'd ruin us." She shook her head. "Truth doesn't ruin, my dear. It heals. Let's take these upstairs." They returned to the drawing room, the chest's contents on the table. Clara joined them, her face white, and gasped at the locket. "Mother's," she whispered. Miss Marple explained the passage, the chest, the second heart. "Your father wronged Thomas," she said. "But you can make it right. Share the legacy, as he intended." Edward sighed, his shoulders slumping. I was wrong, he said. James, Clara. We'll settle it fairly. Clara hugged James, tears falling. Miss Marple smiled, her knitting in her hands. The house felt lighter, its secrets bared. She slept soundly, waking to a clear dawn. Blackwood Hall was at peace, and St. Mary Mead waited. She was ready for her next puzzle. Chapter 18. The Whispered Name. The morning mist hung low over Blackwood Hall, its gray veil softening the estate's stone walls. Miss Jane Marple woke early, her eyes opening to the faint light seeping through her room's heavy curtains. The air was cold, carrying the musty scent of old wood and damp stone, and the house creaked softly, as if murmuring secrets it had yet to share. Her mind was sharp, replaying the events of the past days, the solved riddle, the hidden passage, the chest's contents, revealing Thomas Blackwood's stolen legacy, and the family's fragile reconciliation. Clara, Edward, and James had agreed to share the inheritance, but a new unease stirred. Last night, at dinner, Clara had whispered of a name overheard in the village. Margaret, a woman tied to old Mr. Blackwood's past, mentioned in fear by a maid. Miss Marple's knitting needles lay still in her lap, her eyes gentle but piercing. Blackwood Hall's shadows were not yet gone. She rose, her joints stiff but her movements steady, and dressed in her tweed skirt and cardigan, pinning her brooch neatly. Her handbag was ready: handkerchief, spectacles, notebook, the 4 notes from the riddle, the orchard map, the ring, the 2 keys, and the new note from the passage. The second heart lies where walls breathe. She moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside. The grounds were dim, the orchard a dark blur in the fog. No lantern glowed now, but the memory of James's tearful discovery of his father's locket lingered. As did Clara's whispered name. Margaret. Who was she, and why did her name unsettle the house? She let the curtain fall and checked her door locked, as always. The house was quiet, but its pulse thrummed with hidden truths. She headed downstairs, her shoes soft on the stone floor. The portraits watched, their stern eyes softer since the family's truth emerged, but a new tension hung in the air. She paused at the east wing, where the study's hidden passage now stood revealed, its bookshelf door slightly ajar. A faint scuff of dirt marked the floor nearby, fresher than yesterday, as if someone had passed through in the night. James, Edward, or another. She moved to the dining room, where breakfast was laid out: bread, jam, tea, but only. Clara was there, her face pale, her hands twisting a napkin. "Good morning, my dear," Miss Marple said, her smile gentle. "Another restless night?" Clara nodded, her voice small. "I heard it again," Miss Marple whispers in the study. "And Lily, the maid, said she heard Margaret's name in the village. It scared her." Miss Marple sat, pouring tea, her mind on the name. "Margaret, you say. Was she known to your father?" Clara's hand stilled, her eyes wide. I don't know. Father never spoke of her. But Lily said the older villagers hush when her name comes up." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes soft but sharp. "A name that silenced the villagers, important." Then Edward entered, his face drawn, his coffee untouched. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low. James followed, his weathered face guarded, his eyes flicking to Clara. Miss Marple smiled, noting their unease. No one mentioned Hargreave, now in custody, but his shadow lingered, as did the house's secrets. Breakfast was tense, the clink of cups loud in the silence. Miss Marple asked small questions. "The village is full of stories," she said lightly. "This Margaret, did she know your family?" "Edward." Edward's cup paused midway to his lips. "Margaret, never heard of her. Village gossip." James's eyes narrowed. "My father mentioned a Margaret once, in a letter, said she was wronged." Clara gasped, her napkin falling. Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking softly. Edward's quick denial, James's hint, Clara's fear, they knew something, or feared they did. She watched James's hand touch his pocket, as if checking the locket twin to Clara's. Breakfast ended, and Edward stood. "We're clearing the West Wing today. Miss Marple join us." "Of course," she said, but her mind was on Margaret. She'd visit the village later, probing for whispers. The group moved to the west wing, searching dusty parlors, bookshelves, cabinets, old rugs, but found nothing. Miss Marple watched, her knitting in her hands. Edward was thorough, Clara distracted, James quiet. No one spoke of Margaret, but their eyes darted to each other, wary dot. At noon, Miss Marple excused herself, saying she needed air. Instead, she took a car to St. Mary Mead, her handbag light. The village was busy. Mrs. Polk, sweeping her step, Tommy, the baker's boy, darting with rolls. She headed to the tea shop, where Mrs. Price and her friends were gossiping. Miss Marple, Mrs. Price called. Back from that spooky hall. What's new? Miss Marple sat, her smile gentle. Oh, it's quieter now, she said. But I heard a name, Margaret. Know anything about her? Mrs. Price's eyes widened, her voice low. Margaret, old Mr. Blackwood's sweetheart, before he married. She vanished, years ago. Some say she died of a broken heart. Others say, worse. Double quotes. Mrs. Lane leaned in. The butcher's wife saw her name in old church records. Someone was asking about her, just last week. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind racing. Margaret, wronged and vanished. Who was asking? She thanked them and moved to the vicarage, where Reverend Thomas welcomed her. Jane, he said, Blackwood Hall again. Just tying loose ends, she said lightly. This Margaret was she tied to the Blackwoods? Mrs. Thomas nodded, her face serious. She was engaged to old Mr. Blackwood, but he broke it off for Clara's mother. Margaret left the village, heartbroken. Some say she cursed the family. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. A curse, or a secret? She thanked them and returned to the hall, her mind full. Margaret, Thomas, the locket, the passage to past was stirring again. At dinner, the dining room was tense. Clara was pale, Edward silent, James gripping his glass. Miss Marple smiled, her questions sharp. Margaret's story is sad, she said. The village says she loved your father, Edward. A locket, maybe, like Clara's. Clara's glass tipped, water spilling. Another locket, she whispered. Edward's jaw tightened. That's ancient history. Why drag it up? James's eyes darkened. History matters. My father said Margaret deserved better. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gentle. Clara's spill, Edward's anger, James's defense, they were unraveling. After dinner, they gathered in the drawing room, but Miss Marple excused herself, saying she was tired. Back in her room, she locked the door, her knitting untouched. She waited until midnight, then slipped to the study, her coat on. The new note in her pocket. The bookshelf door was ajar, the passages draft cold. She stepped inside, her shoes silent, and followed it to the chamber. A faint glow caught her Aja lantern, left burning. She paused, listening. Footsteps, soft and quick, came from above. She hid in the shadows, her breath slow. Edward emerged, his face pale, a paper in his hand. He knelt by the chest, pulling out a small box, its wood carved with a rose. He opened it, revealing a letter, its ink faded but clear. Margaret, he whispered, his voice breaking. Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice soft. Good evening, Mr. Blackwood. Another secret. Edward froze, the lantern swinging. Miss Marple, I didn't want Clara to know. Father ruined Margaret. This letter, she wrote it, begging him to return. He kept it, like a trophy. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gentle. And you hid it, to protect him. He nodded, his eyes wet. Clara's suffered enough. She shook her head. Truth heals, my dear. Show her. Let Margaret rest. A noise made them turn. Clara, in her nightdress, her face white. Edward, she whispered. What's this? Miss Marple smiled, stepping back. Your brother has something to share, my dear. Edward sighed, handing Clara the letter. She read it, tears falling, and hugged him. We'll make it right, she said. For Margaret, for Thomas, for James. Miss Marple returned to her room, her work done. The house felt lighter, its whispers stilled. She slept soundly, waking to a clear dawn. Blackwood Hall was at peace, and St. Mary Mead waited. She was ready for her next puzzle.